to Deep Thoughts, Shallow Plots. My name's Erika, and I really like to watch horror movies.
My name is Katy, and I really like to overanalyze things.
Katy, today's overanalysis is a very special occasion.
Our first sequel.
Yes, this month, I think it marks 2 years since we've started this podcast, and we haven't covered a sequel yet.
Nope.
And today felt right to do that.
A sequel for the third movie we ever covered that takes place 2 years after that movie.
Yep.
So
it's perfect.
Kismet.
Kismet, exactly.
And that movie is Scream 2.
Yep, we're talking about Scream 2 and all of the meta-analysis of sequels that go with it.
Yes. Quick plot. Oh no, Ghostface Killer is back. He's not called Ghostface Killer. He's just called Ghostface.
Ghostface, yeah.
Ghostface is back.
Ghostface is back.
Oh no. Only this time it's at college instead of in the high school.
Right, and these murders, this string of new Ghostface murders have a striking resemblance and overlap with the original murders in Woodsboro just a couple of years previous.
And wouldn't you know it, they're located in vicinity to our original final girl, Sydney. Even though she's moved from California to like Ohio.
Ohio, yeah, it's nuts, yeah. So can I just, before we jump into anything, I just want to immediately say that the song Red Right Hand...
They don't even take like 2 minutes to get to it.
We get to hear it twice in this movie.
Yes, we do.
And the first time we hear it is like at literally 2 minutes and 6 seconds.
Yes.
And then we get to hear it again at about 37 minutes in.
And I liked the part that they used when they first dropped it because it's in the movie theater.
Yes.
And it's the part of the song that's like... how you see the man with the red right hand on like your TV screen and you should turn the TV off. And I'm like, oh, I see. I get. Oh, okay.
As they're walking into a movie
Thematic.
theater with a huge screen.
Thematic.
I love it. Shout out to Red Right Hand.
I was grooving. I was humming along.
Yeah, you
were. Yeah. Loved it. Loved every second.
Like I said, I re-listened to our original Scream episode and we spent a lot of time you singing Red Right Hand. Or not singing, but going. That's
what that song makes me do. Doesn't make me sing, it makes me groove.
It's true. It is a groovy song.
And I gotta say, I think we also spent some time just sort of talking about the soundtrack.
We did
there's
spend
a lot
quite
of
a bit of time
good
talking about the
90s
soundtrack.
bops.
Yeah.
And I think this one also lives up to the good 90s bops.
You think so?
Yeah,
Can
not
you
quite
talk
as
more
well.
about that? Because as I was watching it, I was like, the sequel is not giving what
Not
the
as
soundtrack.
much as the first one.
The soundtrack
No.
is not giving what the soundtrack for the original did.
No. But I still, just the whole time the music, whenever music was on in the background, I was always just sort of like, yeah, 90s.
Yeah.
There were a few moments, not as much as the first one, but a few moments that made me go, oh yeah, 90s.
Nice.
Actually, the big one was, the first one is famous for its gay subtext. This one has an actual gay character. Did you catch that? One of the bodyguards assigned to Sydney, when she, is telling what their star sign is.
Yes.
Keep being you, girl.
Yes. That's the final girl energy we need in this world, yes.
But she mentions that one of them, she is like divorced.
Not married, yes.
Yeah, got married, but is divorced.
Yes.
And the other one, she
Not
is
married.
pretty sure is gay.
Okay.
And then
Does that become text?
the only line he like really noticeably gets right basically to her, but like to the screen close up of his face, literally a millisecond before he gets stabbed is "Don't ask, don't tell."
Yes, he does say that.
I was just like 90s.
Yes.
You stop it, you. We also do get actually Randy when he's making fun of Billy over the phone. He calls him
homorepressed.
Homorepressed mama's boy.
Yes.
And I was like, yes, Randy, we were watching the same movie.
Which he did not know that he was saying that most likely to Billy's mom.
I know.
Most likely. I actually believe that that's probably who it was. Well, she kind of says it at the end. Yeah, she's like...
I did not think... Well, we'll get into that. I did not think it was her. I thought it was Mickey because they have a certain energy, him and Randy.
Yeah.
But no, she says that she got stab happy.
Yep.
And who amongst us
hasn't felt that way?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to kick it off with some particularly good horror stuff that happens in this film.
Katy jump scare count. Only one.
Really?
But it was a big one.
And what is it?
It's in the Sarah Michelle Gellar death scene.
Okay.
before she dies when it's not even, the killer's coming to get her because she's clearly our Drew Barrymore talking on the phone. And like, it turns out one of her friends was sorority sisters is still in the house and she like pops up around a corner.
Oh, yeah.
And I fucking jumped.
Yes. And then the sorority sister answers the phone and Ghostface now knows that Cece has a boyfriend named Ted.
Yes.
And so can
Who's
pretend
a drunk.
to be Ted. Yeah, it sounds like she needs to cut Ted loose.
Cece girl, do better.
Yeah. But I really liked
that was my only jump scare.
in that opening scene, and I actually have I feel
God,
like
the opening
I have
scene
a
is
few
so
things
good.
to say about the opening
Jada
scene.
Pinkett's like really brings it.
And Omar Epps, I think they both do great.
Yeah. But just her death, man.
Was great. But I actually, even before Jada Pinkett's death, I actually really like. And now I can't even remember their actual name. Or I mean, their character names.
No, the whole time I was just like, okay, Jada, Omar.
Okay, Omar, yeah. When Omar Epps gets stabbed through that like divider in the bathroom.
The thing that makes me scared whenever I'm in a public bathroom.
Yes. I love that.
That I somehow knew about before I even saw the movie.
Right.
Like I heard about it when it first came out and I was a child.
Well, also.
And it stayed with me forever.
There's a reference, like a parody reference to that scene in one of the Scary Movie movies.
Yes, that might have been where I caught it.
You might have seen that before you ever saw Scream.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't
think
purposely watch any of the Scary movies.
But they happened.
But
yeah.
they were happening in my vicinity for sure.
Absolutely.
So somehow I have been aware that at any moment in a public bathroom you could get stabbed through the partition.
That's interesting because Omar Epps' character like hears like murmuring.
Yeah, he leans close.
And he leans in, he like puts his ear up to it. And I'm like, what are you doing? Yeah.
He thinks that's sexy talk. I don't know why though, because the talk
was happening.
That is happening. Like they start real quick with the mommy issues.
Yeah.
Because it's stuff like, oh, mommy, I was a bad boy or something. Or like, oh, confess to mommy.
And Omar is like enraptured.
Like, oh yeah, tell me more.
And then gets stabbed through the cheek through the dividing wall.
A little bit on him. Not on him, but a little bit on him.
Yeah.
Dude, don't listen in on that.
Yeah. I also really enjoyed the entire scene of like Cece's death.
Yeah.
Sarah Michelle Gellar's character. Because this, I think, was a great opportunity, which they took full advantage of, to make references to a lot of sorority girls in horror, which is a trope that didn't really fit in with the first movie because they're in high school, not college.
Yeah.
But I think it was just a really great way to hit on another like classic slasher trope for the sequel.
I did notice when Randy again is on the phone with him, he just lists like, I don't know, 4 sorority slashers, 4 or 5.
Yeah.
He just lists a bunch of them.
Yeah. I also enjoyed the scene where Gail and Dewey are kind of hiding from Ghostface in the theater department. And Gail sees...
in the sound booth or whatever.
Sound booth, but it's soundproof, so she can't get Dewey's attention. And then Dewey gets stabbed, and we think he's dead.
But of course, Dewey never dies until he does.
Until the 5th one,
which was a mistake.
And I think the entire set piece with Sid and Hallie, when they get into that car crash and get themselves out of it.
When horror slows down like that, like when they need to carefully and quietly creep around the unconscious Ghostface to get out of the car. When horror gets slow, it is terrifying.
It was nerve-wracking.
Yeah,
for sure.
I love that kind of horror.
Those were kind of my favorite horror moments. Any others for you?
No, I mean, I was going to say that car scene was like the top tier for me. And then the other one was just, the way that Jada Pinkett dies. Yeah, that shot we get her of her in front of the movie screen, like looking at everybody with all of her blood coming out of her. Like, it's so good.
And the fact that everybody is like cheering for a while until they realize what's actually happening.
Not what they thought it. Yeah,
because they think it's part of it.
Yeah,
it's all part of the.
Yeah. And we'll get to the blurring
fantasy
of the line between reality and movies.
I think one of my favorite things about the Scream franchise, just point blank, is the self-awareness and the meta-ness, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
That just goes through the entire franchise. And it is interesting as you continue to watch the franchise how, like, they really never let go of it, but it does kind of change a little bit.
Yeah.
And so in this opening scene, before Jada Pinkett Smith and Omar Epps die, I don't think she was Jada Pinkett Smith yet.
I think she was just Jada Pinkett.
Yeah. Anyway, before they die, I think they get a pretty interesting sort of moment of self-awareness where, like, Jada Pinkett, like, literally one of the first things she says, one of the first lines her character has is like a critique of like racial inequity in the horror genre, and specifically in Scream or Stab in their universe.
Yeah,
right?
She's so right.
She's so right. I was like, is there even like a single person of color in the original Scream?
No,
there's not. Right. And this is something that horror as a genre has, a history of, and has to grapple with. But it's just really interesting to me that there are Black characters in this movie who do make it farther, right? So like,
one of them survives.
Jada Pinkett and Omar Epps die, right? And so like they kind of are that they're the Casey Becker and Steve Orth or whatever, and so
we should know their names.
It is a little bit. We really should, but
sorry, it's hard when they're so.
But Casey Becker
iconic.
Was Drew Barrymore.
I know. Maybe it was just because Casey Becker had more of a tie to the rest of the movie because she was the one who was like Stu's sort of ex.
Right. And
whereas these two people were only chosen because like they have no actual connection to Sydney or the killers or anything. They're literally just chosen because they had similar names to original deaths.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And Cece's real name is Casey. Is that true?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why she's chosen.
Yeah.
And so it makes it hard to remember them because they like aren't actually connected. Not them, but their names.
Yeah, their characters.
They don't really come up again other than.
Yeah. So it's interesting, the way that we get this immediate sort of critique of, the lack of melanin in horror films. And then we immediately kill the two Black characters we just got introduced to have two more introduced later. But I think like, the Black characters that we get that make it past that first scene. So we get Hallie and Joel, roommate, the cameraman.
And Joel, the cameraman.
But they're kind of still there to serve pretty stereotypical roles. Like,
the best friend.
Yeah, Hallie's
just there to be supportive.
Sort of the parallel of the best friend, right?
But like comparing her characterization to Tatum, where Tatum was this very fully realized character.
Yeah.
Where we're still like Tatum. Yeah. We love Tatum. And Hallie is what?
She's trying to get into a sorority.
Yeah.
She's rushing a sorority.
Maybe a psych major because she makes jokes about being Sydney's therapist.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I don't know if that's actually because she is a psych major or not. Or if those are jokes. And I think she's dating Mickey.
Yeah, I don't know.
They have something happening between them. I felt like they maybe kiss on the lips once in a sort of dry way.
Yeah, and I think like at a scene when they're at a party, like they're talking to each other, like they have like some obligation to each other during that social gathering. But it's not
all like Tatum and Stu.
No.
Where it's like, oh, they're dating.
Yeah. But yeah, so like Hallie is a great example. She kind of like gets to be this parallel. And like it also another really interesting thing that Jada's character brings up pretty consistently is, the fact that maybe a Black person or a person of color would not find themselves in a situation because they would run, right?
Yeah.
They'd get out of there.
And notably, that is what Hallie says when they get out of there. And Sydney's like, no, I got to go back and see what it is. And because of that, because they hesitate, Hallie gets fucking murdered.
And then Hallie dies. And so she knows that she should run. And she knows that like that is the smart thing to do.
Yeah.
But she doesn't. And she dies because of it.
Yeah.
And like kind of the purpose of her death is just kind of to further traumatize Sydney and like help Sydney on her journey as a final girl,
right?
Rather than like the way Tatum in the first movie
is very much her own character,
is a whole character.
Like she has her own connection to the killers.
Yeah.
She has a connection to Sydney, of course. She also has a connection to Dewey. Like she's woven into the narrative throughout. And like has her own opinions and shit.
Yeah.
I don't really know that Hallie really.
And Hallie's just kind of there.
She's just there to be there. Yeah, and then, to exist for Sydney.
Yeah. We could talk about Joel as well, right?
And he does run away.
He does.
And he is right to because he survives.
He like doesn't shut up the entire film about how
he should not be doing this.
When he does learn that the camera guy from the first movie did die. Kenny. R.I.P.
Kenny.
Yeah. Big ups to Kenny. Pour one out for Kenny. That he gets nervous, right?
Yeah.
And he's just like, okay, I just want to make sure we're making good choices because I don't want to die, and
and he makes good choices, and he makes good choices,
and he survives. Good job.
And
Joel.
in the end, it seems like he does make a step forward with his career because then when Gail gets in the ambulance with Dewey instead of getting the scoop, he picks up the camera and does the interview, and
that's
he's like, I'm doing it all, bitch.
Yeah.
Getting in there. So good for him.
Good for
him. He
him.
comes out on top.
So that was, I love that just like immediate self-reference of like, there's actually a bunch more happening in the genre that we didn't even cover in the first one.
Right. And I think they feel like that they can make that critique because they feel like they've self-corrected by including characters of color. But I don't think they actually did self-correct.
Not for the second one.
No.
And then once we get into the requels, right, where Sydney has a significantly smaller part, then we really do get like, I think, fully fleshed characters who happen to be of color.
And gay characters.
And gay characters.
Don't just say, don't ask, don't tell.
Yeah, right. But you got to wait for the 20th century or 21st century for that to happen, right? So we've already mentioned it. There's 2 killers in this film, just like the first one.
Yep.
But this one is Mickey, played by Timothy Olyphant.
Yeah.
And Nancy, played by Laurie Metcalf.
Yeah. Also known as Debbie Salt.
Debbie Salt, yeah. Or Nancy Loomis.
Or whatever her maiden name was.
Yeah, who knows? I don't think we ever find out.
Yeah.
So they're the killers. We know this. Did you notice, because you actually mentioned to me and asked me if I noticed that all the killing happens with someone's left hand?
Yeah.
Which
according
I did not
to the
notice.
IMDb's.
Okay, thank you, IMDb.
They said that it was all with the left hand because notably Debbie Salt, when she's like interviewing, uses her right hand, whereas Mickey is always using his left hand. So even when it's not him killing people, Nancy is smart enough to be like, I'll use my left hand so people think it's Mickey working alone.
Yeah. Did you happen to notice, I felt like in comparison to the original, this movie relies much more heavily on guns than knives.
I have thoughts about that.
Okay.
My specific thought is that Mickey is so convinced that sequels are better than the original that he refuses to stick to his role of stabbing. Like, he just will not stab people.
No.
He like hardly does. He pushes Cece out off the balcony. Like he stabs her first, but like they're real off the balcony.
Yeah.
He, crashes the car.
I wrote down their names.
Oh, did you?
Maureen and Phil.
Maureen and Phil.
Yeah, one of them's like Maureen Stevens or something.
Yeah.
Or Phil, something like that.
Yeah.
That's their names, Maureen and Phil.
Okay.
Do we want to start over? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Maureen and Phil.
Yeah.
Right, so should we just like run down... I've got a list of the kills.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about who does what when? So, yeah, there's Maureen and Phil. And do you think... who do you think kills Maureen and Phil?
Okay. My first thought was that because the first thing that pulls Phil, not Omar Epps.
Nope. His name's Phil. Yep.
First thing that pulls Phil in is hearing that talk about mommies and that stuff. So I was like, oh, that's probably Nancy. Sort of luring him in with that. Or at least she's the one doing the talking.
Okay.
So that's kind of what I thought. But then whoever puts on the jacket and pretends to be the boyfriend, who pretends to be Phil, must be Mickey because he needs that body type to pass as her boyfriend.
Right.
Otherwise, Maureen would be like, well, you're not my boyfriend. You're some lady. Right? Even with the mask on. I think she would tell the difference.
That you're somebody else. Yeah.
Yeah. So that one has to be Mickey.
You think it's Mickey?
Yeah.
Do you think Mickey kills Maureen and Nancy kills Phil?
That was my first thought.
Okay.
That they were working together.
It would
or Mickey killed them both.
It would make sense for that opening scene for them both to be there.
Right.
That makes sense to me. What I think, now that's interesting that, so you think that Mickey kills SMG? Kills Sarah Michelle Gellar?
Yes.
So, I wrote down, I said Mickey is calling and Nancy is killing.
I did the other way.
Oh my gosh, tell me why you think that.
Okay. Because I was also strongly convinced that was Billy's role in the first one, that he was the one who did most of the phone calls. Not all of them, but most of them.
I agree.
Especially the one with Drew Barrymore, where he's doing that kind of flirting
doing
talk.
The phone call.
So it feels right in my heart for it to be Nancy.
And Stu's doing the dirty work of actually killing them.
Yeah. But also because whoever is on the phone is not the one who sneaks in.
Exactly.
Because that person is being the distraction.
Right.
And the person who sneaks in, when that person is running around the house, they just seem like a bigger person. And also they like grunt and stuff a few times and it sounds kind of mannish. So that's really the only thing.
So you think Nancy's the one on the phone and Mickey is the one killing. Okay.
Did you feel differently?
I did, but I'm going to be honest, I can't remember why.
Yeah. It was really just because he seemed kind of mannish, and also because, I don't know, I started to suspect, like I said, that Mickey is just, that stabbing is not his main passion.
His forte.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure he loved stabbing Maureen 7 times because he makes sure to mention that when he's even just being his regular self talking to his friends. He's like, yeah, that chick got stabbed 7 times. Ooh. I'm like, dude, you're kind of revealing yourself a little with that.
Well, and then but of course, like, also that whole scene, like, he gets to, like, put on a show.
Right. And that's the thing, is that I just think, I don't know, it makes more sense to me that Mickey is the one who throws her off a balcony than that Nancy does that.
Defenestration.
Yeah.
Does she get thrown out a window, though?
No, just off the balcony.
So, okay, but it's definitely a team effort when they kill Cece. I think it's Mickey who attacks Sid and Derek when they're alone in that frat house.
Yeah, I do too.
After everybody realizes something's going down at whatever the sorority house that Cece dies in.
But I also still think that that's another, like, group effort. Because, again, there's somebody else on the phone who's like, remember me?
Uh-huh.
And again, I feel like that should be Nancy because there's the double meaning of it where A, remember this creepy voice on the phone, and B, you might actually remember me because I was your ex-boyfriend's mom who you probably met.
You probably have.
You know, so it, like, works better if that's Nancy. And then again, if that's the person on the phone, it seems like then Mickey should be the one doing the killing.
Right.
But then
the attack.
But I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's pretty clear that Nancy kills Randy.
Which I was so wrong about until the moment when she says that she got knife happy or whatever.
She does admit, yeah.
No, I was so convinced it was Mickey.
Really?
Because they spend so much time talking about horror movies. Yeah. I don't think Nancy gives a shit about horror movies.
No, they don't.
Like, they've done nothing to lead us to believe that Nancy cares about movies, whereas we've already seen Mickey and Randy arguing about movies with each other.
In what I think is a scene that I think needed a lot more work. That film school scene, I
the first one where they're talking about it and talking about the sequels that are better.
Happy to talk more about that,
but
I did not enjoy it. But yeah, like Randy and Mickey kind of like are kind of mirrors and foils for each other.
They fight with each other, and when it does start to get personal, where Randy starts being like, "You're not as good as the original," you know, or like, "Why would you want to imitate the original?" Whatever he's saying. The person on the phone bites back with really personal things about Randy, about how he's not the leading man and he's never going to get the girl. Yeah. I'm like, Nancy? That seems more like Mickey would say those sort of things. But it could be that Mickey was on the phone and Nancy does the killing. But the other thing that got me, when Dewey and Gail decide to look at some of their footage of the crowds to see if they can get some clues.
Yeah.
And then, Ghostface starts putting on their own footage of the killings. We get the footage from inside the van, and you can like hear the person on the phone talking. So obviously the person who's talking on the phone is in the van.
Okay.
And somebody is filming this. And I thought Mickey was the guy who did the filming.
That would make sense.
So I thought it was all him.
He's the one in film school.
But I guess maybe what it was that, but just because he was there doesn't mean Nancy wasn't also there.
Right.
So maybe they were both there.
Yeah. Because Nancy kind of in the end climax where the killers are revealing their their grand plan and their real motives. She does mention that Randy talked.
Yes. Yeah. She
spoke ill.
Yes. Yeah. She explicitly says. So she did kill him. I'm just not entirely convinced that she was the one on the phone, or that Mickey wasn't there too, because somebody was recording it, and he's the camera guy.
He's the camera guy,
and he's the guy who cares about movies. So it'd be weird for it. I don't know. But then there was the thing that I noticed, which was that on Randy's hand for just a split second, we see what I thought was a little blood smear that kind of looks like a kiss.
Yeah, a little bit like a lip print, yeah.
IMDb called it a lipstick kiss.
Okay.
That says that. Obviously, then it's a woman who did the murdering.
It's not what that means.
Again, why is Nancy leaving behind a lipstick kiss?
Why would she do that? That's DNA.
That's weird. Yeah. That's a weird choice, especially if she's trying to frame Mickey.
Yeah.
So I think it's just like a blood stain that happens to look like a kiss. So it's like kind of alluding to, but not like...
No. I don't know if I'm buying
or
that.
Mickey kisses him.
Yeah.
With bloody lips.
I mean, literally everybody has lips anybody could put on lipstick.
Yeah, and maybe Billy wasn't the only homo-repressed one. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. So that one's ambiguous for me, even though it's the one where we explicitly know.
Yeah, because Nancy does say that Randy spoke ill of Billy, and that's, then she got stab happy about it.
Yeah. According to my notes, she actually says knife happy, which isn't as good as stab happy.
No, it's not.
She should have said stab happy.
Yeah, that one's better because of the A sound. The stab happy. Yeah. I think it's Mickey, or again, it's a
double feature,
a dual effort. The attack on those useless cops.
Okay,
that
yeah.
are supposed to be protecting Sid in the don't ask, don't tell scene.
I thought Mickey.
Yeah, like, I think it's Mickey is the one who is, like, driving the car and then passes out.
Specifically because when we do see him later at the theater, he has a wound on his forehead, which very easily could have come from hitting the steering wheel or whatever.
Very
like,
much.
It looks like that kind of wound.
And so I think
that's him.
That's Mickey.
And because I think it's happening kind of concurrently with Dewey and Gail at the film school.
Yes.
And I think that's Nancy.
That's probably Nancy.
It seems like a smaller ghost face.
Yeah. So then it's Mickey who kills Hallie.
Yes.
Yeah, in the end of that set piece there.
Yeah, and those two cops. And then Nancy who attacks Dewey.
Nancy's the one who attacks Dewey. Yep.
Yeah. And then I think that's even further confirmed because then Gail runs outside and Nancy's like already right there.
Yes, right.
And then like takes her hostage or whatever.
Yes.
So like that's gotta be. And then I guess Mickey went straight from the car crash to picking up Sydney's boyfriend from a rager.
Yeah, because then Mickey shoots Derek.
Yeah.
So Sydney has a boyfriend this entire film.
And he's played by that guy.
Jerry O'Connell.
Who's in things, yeah.
But his character's name is Derek.
And maybe started dating Sarah Michelle Gellar at this point?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yeah, okay.
That her and that SMG
Yeah.
and Jerry O'Connell were dating during the filming of this movie.
Though they don't really interact, so that's fun.
Not really. So Mickey,
anyway, he's in it, and
Mickey
he's dating
shoots
Sydney.
Derek because Derek gets...
He tries to pull the thing...
Yeah.
Mickey, tries to make Sydney think that Derek is
That
the
it is
murderer.
Derek,
that they're working together in another Stu Billy situation.
And does he, like... Does Derek end up hanging by a cross?
Okay, no, he's on like a weird star-shaped thing.
Okay. But he's kind of...
It's from the theater production.
Immobilized.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's because, he gave away his Greek letter to his girl, which you're not supposed to do, even though it seems like everybody does it.
And, well, like... Was the issue that she was not also part of the Greek system? Was
Maybe,
that part of the concern?
Or also, I think you weren't supposed to do it in general because the little scene we get with the other frat boys is them being like, "Who do you love?" and him being like, "Sydney," and they're like, "No, I think you met your brothers at the whatever house."
Yeah.
So I think it's just sort of like a brotherhood blah.
So
thing.
they kind of
but
like...
I think they're using props from the theater because two of the sorority sisters that we know.
Yes.
Portia de Rossi and that other chick whose name I can't remember,
and
who was in other things.
Rebecca Gayheart.
Yes, who's in Jawbreakers.
Who's in Jawbreaker and Urban Legend, another
Which
90s slasher film. Yes,
I've never seen it.
It's been a minute. But
anyway, because they seem to tie him up to one of the props from the movie.
Yeah.
Which is like some sort of star thing,
and then like
that lowers down, so it could be like a god.
And then pour alcohol down his throat to get him drunk, because that's just what
you do when you're in a frat.
Yeah, I guess apparently.
Did you like the line that they have early on where Hallie tries to get Sydney to go join the sorority, and Sydney's like, "You know me and organized religion," and she's like, "It's not a religion, it's a sorority," and Sydney's like, "That's worse."
That's right. Yes. Sydney comes down as very anti-sorority, and I love that for her. And then, so Derek is already up there.
Yeah.
And so
conveniently, I guess.
And then Mickey tries to convince Sydney that Derek's in on it.
But he doesn't try for very hard, because then he just like shoots him.
And then he just shoots Derek.
I'm like, dude, if we're doing a cat and mouse thing, like, commit.
And then
Billy would have kept this going like all night.
All night, yeah. Billy and Stu together would have made a whole thing of it.
Oh my God. They would have been touching all up on that man's body.
Yep. Nancy shoots Mickey. And in the climax, when their partnership collapses and Nancy shoots Mickey.
Her plan, just like Billy and Stu had a plan to frame somebody else and did frame Con for the first murders that they did. Nancy's plan is to frame Mickey and have it be like a final shootout between Mickey and Sydney where they shoot each other and both die. Which, I think was very similar to Billy and Stu's plan.
I think so, yeah.
That was like Sydney's dad. And
murder-suicide.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Nancy ends up shooting Mickey, and then technically Sydney and Gail do some fancy conniving to like incapacitate Nancy, but it's Cotton Weary who ends up shooting her.
Yes.
And then for good measure, at the very end, Gail and Sydney shoot Mickey one more time.
Well, he gets back up.
Because he comes back,
So they shoot him again, and then they also shoot Nancy a little bit more.
Probably should probably shoot Nancy one more time. Yeah.
Because I think specifically Sydney does, but Gail gets it because she's been through this.
Yes.
And Cotton has a look on his face like, oh, that was a lot of bullets. I don't know. Like, dude, you don't know.
Yeah, I'm interested.
I'm new to this shit.
I'm excited to talk about Cotton more because he kind of gets a...
Yeah, he has an interesting role in this.
Interesting stuff to do for sure. So that's kind of like our kill count and who we think is in charge of what.
Yeah, definitely it's another situation of there being like a Loomis and a lackey.
Right, yeah.
And like, because even when Nancy's not doing the killing, you get the sense that she is the mastermind. And that Mickey's just sort of there because he's just kind of a sadistic little weirdo.
Right, and
which is giving Stu.
We talked a lot about this in our first Scream episode, the fact that the characters in that film are literally children.
Yes.
And how, like, yes, they're in college now, but, like, they're still very much children in comparison to Nancy Loomis, a.k.a. Debbie Salt.
Who is a grown-ass adult.
Yeah. Like,
and she is, she's kind of grooming...
Yeah.
Mickey,
there's a power imbalance for sure.
Yeah. And I will say, I feel like they kind of bring that back, not to get ahead to the requels.
Yeah.
But in Scream 5, I think also has that kind of grooming vibe in it. With some of these people are children and some of these people are more like adults. Young adults, but...
especially with Jack Quaid's character.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. He's kind of grooming that. She's a teenager.
Yeah. She's a child.
Yeah. So they keep that theme going in later ones, which is cool. But yeah, let's talk about characters.
So you can tell it's a sequel because Sydney and Gail both got haircuts.
Yeah, and Gail got those highlights.
She
those
got
little
some
streaks,
highlights.
Whatever. Yeah, technically not highlights. They're streaks because they're colorful. And Dewey doesn't like them, but I think he does.
Yeah.
Liar.
I think just because I think he doesn't like change.
Yeah. That's true too. And yeah, Sydney looks cute with her little short hair.
She does. She looks great. And I love that she just immediately got on, she immediately adopts caller ID.
I know.
Yep.
And which seems like it's still kind of a new technology.
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty fresh.
Because she gets them. Because it kind of seems like the first time we see her in this film, she's getting a prank call.
Yeah.
From a total asshole.
And she like is so...
She's so...
above it.
Calm. Yeah.
Yeah, she's like, yeah, I deal with this every fucking day of my life.
Is your number blah, 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 blah? You know? And then she's like, something about... crank calls are illegal and
using penal code whatever
blah, 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 blah,
so I would think about that next time.
And then,
Corey.
And then it's really funny because then the guy's like, man, oh, it's not fun anymore. And I'm like, it was never fun.
Prank.
It was never fun. So she's got a new haircut. She's she's surviving, maybe even thriving.
I know, and she really does approach things head on in a way that I admire about her.
Yeah.
Like with as far as I'm concerned, if I was Sydney, I would never answer another phone again a day in my life.
No.
Like, why would you? You have a perfect excuse to never answer another phone.
Yeah.
Which is just great in general because phones suck.
Yeah.
But then, like, even answering the phone in that sorority house when she does get the first call from the murderers, it's like, Sydney, no, walk away. And she's like, no, I'm not going to. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to face this head on because otherwise it's just going to be this constant cat and mouse. And like, we're not doing that.
I don't want to do this for the rest of my life.
Right?
Yeah.
Which I think is also why she goes back to be like, I'm going to take off that guy's mask and find out who it actually is.
Because she thinks they're down for the count. She thinks they're passed out in the car, right? That they got their head bonked.
And she's like, it's worth it to just get it over with. Which
I see where she's coming from. But again, Hallie is making other very good points. Because I think...
she should have been out of there.
I don't know if Sydney ever ends up seeing herself as in a movie. Right?
Yeah.
So, like... Hallie knows, like, as she's looking at it from the horror movie perspective, like, we need to run. Like, there is no reason to go back. Only bad things will happen.
Yeah.
Right? But Sydney's not thinking about it like a horror movie. She's thinking about it like, this is what my life is like.
24/7.
This is what I need,
Yeah.
This is what I need to feel better.
Yeah, and I think she thinks, the quickest way to get to the end of it is to know who's doing it.
Right.
Because there's also, like, she's more focused on the whodunit aspect of the narrative. In a way.
Yep. And then, I mean, obviously, of course, as the franchise continues, the whole point is that it's always somebody new who done it.
Yeah.
So And I also love that Sydney has found theater.
I love that for her. I love her like finding catharsis through art.
Yeah. And it's
maybe also getting away from herself for a while, which like I think is okay.
Yeah.
In those small doses.
And like experiencing another reality.
Yeah.
Through a
I
character.
have things to say about her professor, but I'll get to that in my literary
that's
corner.
interesting.
I just think he kind of sucks.
Yeah.
Like as a person, not as a professor.
Yeah, her professor is like, I don't know, I feel like he's kind of flattering her a lot.
Yeah.
Be like, you're
to get her to do what she
actress.
wants.
Yeah, in order to continue to have the show go on. Right, yeah.
Don't like it.
Also, Sydney has, I wrote down one of my favorite lines that she says when I think she's like confronted by Mickey before Nancy shows up. And Mickey is going on and on about Billy Loomis, right? You know, because he's obviously very inspired by him, you know. And then Sydney says, you forgot one thing about Billy Loomis.
Oh, yeah.
I killed him.
Yes,
you did. You shot him right in the fucking head, too, girl. Yeah. And I'm like, that's right, Sydney. That's the final girl I know and love. I just noticed, obviously, you know, the meta-ness of the Scream franchise, making reference to horror movies and slashers specifically. And then, of course, in this one, they get into talking specifically about sequels. And it's interesting in that opening, or not opening, but after the opening scene where we're kind of introduced to our characters in that film class, which, again, I hate and have a lot of notes. There's a couple references to final girls in sequels, specifically like Ripley in Alien.
Oh, yeah.
And Sarah Connor in Terminator, right?
Both badasses.
And it is worth noting that they do kind of get the final girl edit and storyline, and as their intellectual property progresses, they become mothers. Right? Ripley, like I think in Aliens, she finds this little girl, Newt, right? And of course, the whole point is that Sarah Connor gives birth to the,
that's like her whole thing.
Yeah, the whole point is the mom thing. And so it's interesting to see in the sequel, Sydney kind of come into her own as a final girl, but she's not really reaching that, like, she's not mother the way the final girls kind of, you know, in the sequels that they're naming off in the film class scene as examples of good sequels, you know, are...
but of course, that is where she's headed.
It is where she's headed, and we do know, like, it's canon. She does get married and have kids. We don't ever see them. Yeah. Which I don't think we need to.
No,
but,
I don't think it's necessary. But that is interesting.
I just love this evolution of Sydney as the final girl.
And I think it's a really great, it is kind of like, it has a more tragic ending than the first one, because it goes from this place of, like, we're starting where Sydney seems like she could actually be doing good. Yeah. And, like, if this sequel didn't happen, she would just go on with her life.
It's been a couple years.
Like, it's traumatizing, obviously, what happened, but, like, she's really growing from it, you know?
It's been a few years. She's moved away. She's, like, physically not in that space anymore. She's met new people.
She's met new people. What do you think about the fact that Randy went to college with her?
I'm not surprised.
I know. I do think it's, like, really sweet that the moment Sydney finds out that more people have been murdered, her first impulse is, like, I need to find Randy.
Yeah.
That they're still each other's, like, people.
Yeah.
When they didn't seem that close in the first movie, like they knew each other, but they were like friends in the same friend group, you know? But now it's like they're the only ones of their peers that survived. Like obviously Gail and Dewey survived, but they weren't friends with Billy and Stu, and like they didn't know fucking I've already forgot her name, Casey, and you know, like
right.
They didn't know any of these people who died.
Yeah, they just like Dewey gets in on it because he's a member of law enforcement.
Yeah, and at least
Gail
he's
gets on it 'cause
Tatum's.
she's a member of the media.
Yeah, he has one connection with Tatum, but that's kind of it.
Yeah,
but I just think it makes a lot of sense that they ended up really connected to each other. Yeah, and a lot of people got very upset about his death.
Really?
Yeah. At the time, some people considered it was like a bad move or like just an ultimate tragedy that he shouldn't have died.
Like a little unceremonious, maybe?
Maybe. I don't know. They just didn't think it was right to kill off Randy after he survived.
I think it makes perfect sense to me.
I think there's also a thing about like needing to kill off.
It's a sequel thing.
It's a sequel thing. Just like they had to kill Dewey in the requels, which, I was upset about that. Yeah. But also I think that Randy... As we'll argue, he's definitely a full archetype, but he also plays the archetype of a scholar.
He does.
And, like, he's kind of an idea guy. He's the guy who understands what's going on. Mm-hmm. And that means you need to lose him. because you need to be in the dark for the tragedy to happen.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how like people's mentors need to die in those like hero stories.
Yeah. And then of course he does get a cameo in the third one.
Oh, that's right.
Right? He's like, he taped
He's
himself.
like, if we ever go through this again,
Yeah.
here's what you need to know.
If this is not a sequel, but actually a trilogy. Yeah. Which I'll talk about in sequel corner.
Yeah. But I do want to say something about, I think what we've been getting at, which is that like, yes, Sydney is going through a final girl arc here, but I think her main character development is actually from like being in this place where she's okay and she can have a best friend and she can have a boyfriend and she can still have Randy and like she still talks to Dewey and stuff, to this place of total isolation. And like her story is really about her getting isolated.
Yeah.
Which is why I think it's more tragic. You know? I mean, we were told right away that her roommate Hallie thinks that Sydney is doing like some self-induced isolation and that it isn't healthy. And I'm like, I think if you're going to self-isolate, probably the weekend that a movie about the most tragic events of your life is coming out, I think she deserves a little. I think that maybe is the healthy thing to do.
It's a fair
like,
point.
I think it's okay to step away. And B, she doesn't actually seem that isolated just because she doesn't want to go to a sorority party.
Yeah, she doesn't want to go to your stupid party.
Lots of people don't want to go to those parties.
Yeah.
But then it's like, then we get like Dewey warning her that the killer could be somebody she already knows.
Right.
And she gets to be like, yeah. Duh. Yeah. Well, what am I supposed to do? Just cut everything off? Just cut everybody off?
Yeah.
You know? Like, is that... And, like, I don't know. We just sort of see her change from that point of, like, yeah, it could be anybody, but I need to keep living my life, you know?
Yeah.
From this point where it's like, she actually is doing well. She's coping. She's healthy. She's moving on in a lot of ways. She's learning the star signs of her bodyguards. She's making connections, you know? Like, she's really open to this place where I think it kind of twists after Randy dies, really. Where she's like, oh, it should have been me, not Randy. And she starts to have that survivor's guilt set in.
Yeah.
Where she starts to get really isolated. And I think it also has, of course, a lot to do with Hallie dying and her boyfriend, whose name I keep forgetting, dying.
Derek
dying, you know?
Yeah.
But the last shot we see of her is that she's all alone. Like, Gail and Dewey still have each other always.
Yeah.
But Sydney is all alone.
And she walks off by herself, right?
Like, purposely, she chooses to.
She's, like, bombarded by news media people.
Yeah, and she purposely is like, I'm not the hero. That guy is. Go talk to Cotton.
Yeah.
So that she can be alone. So, like, she is doing the self-isolation by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
That she's accused of at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
And I just feel so bad for her.
Yeah.
And that's why in the beginning, I think the beginning of the third movie, she's, like, living in a cabin sort of off the grid, doing remote work. Is that the third one where she's doing that remote calls?
Yeah, she's like she's taking
like a
calls
crisis
hotline. For like a domestic abuse hotline or some other kind of crisis.
Yeah. And she's like
sense.
Keeping no contact with people and like actually self-isolating. And I'm just like, oh, you could have been okay. You had your theater degree that was going to be useless, but you enjoyed it. So I love that for you.
But it made you happy.
And you still had Randy.
Yeah. Well, no, not anymore.
Not anymore.
Randy's gone.
They're all gone.
Yeah.
I guess you still have Dewey and Gail, but like she never really had Dewey and Gail. I don't know. She kind of has Dewey. But like her and Gail are... Anyway, we can get to that when we talk about them. The other thing about Sydney is just that another aspect of the guilt she's dealing with. She has her survivor's guilt, but she also, for some stupid reason, has Cotton Weary showing up.
I don't understand what Cotton Weary is doing hanging around this college campus.
Gail brought him.
Did she?
Yeah, because she guaranteed that he would have 15 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
And like an actual interview where him and Sydney talk to each other.
Yeah.
They're like reunited or whatever is what it seems like he was told, but Gail never actually did that. But it bothers me that when he does finally talk to her, and like when other people talk about it too, I remember being annoyed about this in the first one.
Yes.
They're like, it's Sydney's fault that he went to prison.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if he was put in jail because a traumatized girl saw a jacket?
Yeah.
That sounds like his lawyer's fault.
Yeah, right.
I am sorry.
And also, like, what he mentions when he kind of bombards Sydney in the library.
I hate that scene.
And he's like,
you sent me to prison
for a year.
I did a year for you.
Yeah.
You can give me 2 minutes.
And I'm like, okay, but you were facing, like, first degree murder. Like, doing only a year? Like, you got lucky, dude.
Right.
And again, it is not Sydney's fault that she misidentified you, and it is not Sydney's fault that the jury or judge moved to convict you.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that was very circumstantial evidence.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God. And yeah, Sydney doesn't owe him shit.
Yeah.
But then he's in the library, like, caging her in and, like, touches her a little bit. And I'm like, I'm glad that I think you get murdered in a later movie.
He does. He is the first death in the third movie.
That's what I thought.
Yep.
I was like, I vaguely remember you being one of the kills.
So we'll talk in a second that this is something that happens. This is sort of like sequel things. Is that we end up getting new information from the original film's like mythology.
Oh, yeah.
And so we get that with Cotton Weary. It's funny how like we make him the red herring again.
Yes,
Love
again,
that.
he could be it.
Yes. Because he really is consistently in the wrong place at the wrong time.
He really does have like he should not be in that library right then.
No.
I mean, he has no way of knowing that somebody's on that computer.
He knows that
must be Mickey, right? Because it's a school computer.
Gotta be, yeah. Yeah, he knows that Sydney, or I assume he knows that Sydney has those two bodyguards that like he's kind of shuffled off, but like could come back at any moment.
Because he purposely kind of comes around a corner where she's sort of like off to the side because they know that there's like a threat nearby.
Yeah.
Like he waits until she's alone.
Yeah.
To approach her.
This is why I think those cops are useless, because like their job is to take care of Sydney, and they're like
they should never have left her alone.
And they're like, you go over there,
especially in a place where there's like she didn't have a wall to her back.
Yeah,
like what?
And then like
I could have done a better job.
Why are they not consistently checking? Be like, is Sydney still there? Okay, good. And like the minute Sydney is not there,
do some like oh my. Yes.
Go, like poke your head around the corner, right?
And I do got to give it up to Cotton because, like, in the very next scene when he is being interviewed by the cops, he is having fucking none of it, and I'm like, "You're right, dude.
Yeah,
these guys have no reason to keep you.
Yeah.
Why are you being detained right now?
It is.
Are you allowed to leave? Get out of there."
It is kind of weird that again. I know that Gale brings him in, but he does really insist on hanging around this college campus,
and insist on like putting all of this on Sydney.
Yeah,
and like constantly being around her, and it's like, dude. You have no right to this.
And then this reminds...
And you were sleeping with her mom, which we never address.
Yeah, right. So it's interesting, like, again, we talked about this in the first one, where, like, there are no adults here, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I kind of think about that. I'm like, where's campus security?
Yeah.
Like, there are, like, students at this university, either on campus or off campus, are being, like, targeted for murder. Where's the dean of students?
Yes. They would be coordinating with the cop.
Yeah, right? So, but of course, it's Cotton becomes imperative at the end.
Yeah.
Right? Because he's actually the one who ends up shooting Nancy.
Right, yeah.
And like
after almost being swayed by her.
Yes, but he kind of becomes fully aware of the entire situation. Like he...
Yeah.
In sort of a foolish manner, like thinks he knows what the situation is as it relates to him, but does not understand that there's much more happening.
He is just living his own little narrative over there.
Very
much.
Like,
I'm gonna be famous.
Yes, very much.
And that's like all that matters to him. And there's like so much more going on that he could know about, but he doesn't until that last moment for some reason.
Yeah.
Why does he even show up at the theater, at the film school?
I don't know.
I don't remember if he gives a reason or not. Or if he just waltzes in suddenly with a gun.
Now I can't remember.
I can't remember either. I think he just kind of shows up.
He's just there. Yeah.
He's just there to be swayed by Nancy.
Something from the first film that, you know, didn't really get resolved all the way, coming back for a final resolution. Yeah. And Gale kind of is the one that like brings him, like drags him in and be like, you're a part of this again.
Gale stands by her man, even when that man is Cotton Weary.
With her new haircut.
Yeah. Like she's a very loyal person. And I guess does have good instincts because she knew he wasn't guilty of what he was accused of.
Yeah.
But she also definitely has a bit of tunnel vision about it all.
Yeah. It's interesting how Gale is simultaneously a very good journalist, but then also like
her boundaries are just kind of like
her boundaries. Yeah, she's a little there's some like moral neutrality.
Yeah.
Or ethical neutrality.
She's like, all that matters is the truth and getting to the heart of the story.
And like the ends justify
and it doesn't matter
who
gets hurt along the way.
Yeah.
Which I guess is one thing when you're dealing with like other stories, but when you're dealing with stories where it's like people getting hurt doesn't just mean like their emotions or their reputation, but like them literally getting stabbed.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, Gail.
Yeah. And Gail has a new cameraman to replace Kenny.
Oh, poor Joel.
And I think Joel is a good cameraman for Gail. Like, I think he kind of
tempers her.
He stands up and like, you know, he's like, hold on, I need to say my piece though. Whereas Kenny was like, no, okay, you know,
we'll go do that. Yeah. He's like,
nope, I'm not going to be doing that because I'm not going to die.
Yeah.
And he doesn't.
And he doesn't. So he knows what he's doing. Gail is, I don't know. She's another weird example. I think we talked about this in the last one about there being no adults.
Yeah.
Where like technically she is an adult in the room.
She is the adult. Yeah.
But she has one specific purpose and it's not to be the adult.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
I feel like the only place where she really feels like an adult in the room is actually in her relationship with Dewey. When he's sort of is acting really immature.
Yeah.
You know, they're definitely like, you can kind of see the age difference between them, which isn't like super pronounced of an age difference, but it's like, it's unclear. Like they dated a little bit. They don't even say in the movie, like what happened between them exactly between these two films, the first and the second. But he's obviously very hurt about it.
Yeah.
And she's like,
feelings.
and she's sort of like, try to be polite.
Yeah.
You know? And he's like going after her hair. And I'm like, guy, chill out. Like, be an adult right now. Like, you guys were just incompatible, I think. I think you just broke up because you were a bad match.
Yeah. Well, but then they do get married.
I know. Well, the problem with them is that they really only work when they have something to fight against.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they just start fighting each other.
They are pretty incompatible because, like, yeah, it seems like what Gail loves to do is like, kind of, argue that the ends will justify the means, right? And that there is sort of like this exploitation of people's, you know, traumatic events for her profit, right?
Yeah. I mean, he has a reason to be upset about the things that she writes in her book.
Yeah. And then Dewey is just like, nah, oh, shucks, you know. He's like a little bit more naive, you know. It's like, why can't we all just get along?
I did like his line that he has. I wrote it all down because I was like, oh, that's the Dewey thesis.
Okay.
Or at least that's what Dewey thinks is the Dewey thesis, which is, how do you know that my dim-witted inexperience isn't merely a subtle form of manipulation used to lower people's expectations, thereby enhancing my ability to effectively maneuver within any given situation? I'm just like, don't worry, baby.
So many words.
I saw your subtle form of manipulation.
Yes.
I saw it. I see you too.
And what I thought is like, is that from Gail's book? Because that's so like
the things I know. He like I don't think he ever talks that much.
Yeah, because that's like
those are like words.
How literary.
Yeah,
you know,
because he's
doesn't
definitely
sound
like the
Dewey.
things he's picking out of her book are definitely things that are like he oozed with inexperience.
Yeah,
some line about that and stuff. I love that he thinks he's doing it on purpose, which probably part of him is.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a but he also like hates that people see him that way. You know, where he's always like, "My name's Dwight, not Dewey."
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
You know, I think he does that a little bit in the first one too, where they're not supposed to call him Dewey when he's on the job and stuff. And it's like, but you're just kind of a baby.
Yeah.
You're just like, no matter how old you get, you're just kind of a baby.
Yeah. You're Deputy Dewey. Sorry about
I don't know. But.
And then, of course, we like, Dewey is there, but then like is basically down for the count the entire third act.
Yeah.
Like in that set piece in the theater department where he gets attacked by Ghostface, who we think is Nancy.
Yeah.
Right. Then he's just down for a while. But do you remember the reason they give for him surviving?
Yeah, the scar tissue.
The scar tissue from his first wound.
Yes.
Saved him from the second wound being fatal.
One of my favorite through lines of Dewey's character that like they even bring into the requel is just how many fucking scars and wounds he has
and the nerve damage
and like all of it. I'm like, you've been fucked up.
He's been stabbed.
Like, Sydney's got nothing on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, he just always tends to like not be there for the final moments and therefore isn't the final girl despite always surviving.
Yes.
Until he doesn't.
Yeah.
But you know, it's just something that I always love in horror movies when you really see the damage. And like the fact that they continue to pull it up throughout the movies. I'm just like, yes.
Oh, yeah, because that is something that always just, like, bugs me is when, like, this happened in The Descent, right? When, like, Juno's leg is broken.
Oh, yeah.
And somehow she, like, gauzes it up and she's using it with ease.
Yeah.
You know, she's got a little bit of a limp, but I was like, there's literally a hole in your leg.
Yeah.
Like, you probably would have bled out by now. You certainly wouldn't be able to move it the way you're moving it. Yeah. So I like that.
Every movie you can see Dewey just
that
deteriorating a little bit more. Yeah. And I also like,
by the sequel, he's already got a bit of a limp, remember?
Yeah, he definitely has a limp.
Yep.
Cut from the nerve damage.
Yep.
And I think he also, just going back to their relationship, we also do find out that like all his, like, he has that snideness about her career, you know, where it's like she's making immoral choices or whatever. But he also has like the other side to that, which is that he's really insecure and doesn't think he can like live up to her because she's this cool career woman and he's just Dewey, you know?
Yeah, he was in law enforcement, but now with his like physical limitations, it's
he's
probably
like,
not viable for him.
Great. And like, but I also think that that's like a contention in their relationship that he's a little bit making up in his head. Because we definitely, I mean, especially as we continue with the movies, but we see it even in this movie where it's like, she has the moment at the end to like interview Sydney, interview Cotton, you know, she's right there. She can tell the story, but Dewey's alive and he's going to the hospital. So she gets in the ambulance with him because that's her priority.
Because she loves
And
Dewey.
then, like, it always is her priority. And he like never really believes it.
Yeah.
I also just find my main feeling about their relationship and why they always get together and then fall apart again is because they always fall in love with each other when they're operating at their best and then expect them both to be the people that they are in those like high adrenaline life or death situations. But
all
like people are not like that all the time. The rest of the time they're just kind of people who do things that are maybe not the best sometimes or like maybe are kind of boring or whatever, but they're like always expecting them to be operating at this really high level.
Yeah. And like,
because that's who they fell in love with.
And make the choices they make through like a variety of different influences.
Yeah.
You know? My very first note when I was taking notes on characters.
Yeah.
I just wrote down, the main three continue to trauma bond.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like Dale and I always do that. Dale and Gooey.
Dale is a great ship name for
I know,
them.
yeah. But anyway,
Gooey.
Gooey's kind of cute.
Anyway.
But of course they reach their, because, you know, they start the whole first part of the movie being like at odds with each other. But they have a turning point when she admits that she feels bad about things.
Yeah.
And also, though, that she wants to fucking catch the killer.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, they're a team now.
Yep.
And then it's like,
they're on the same page.
Of course, they see footage. They're going over their old footage, and it's of them arguing with each other. And they're like, now we'll make out. I'm like, guys, this is dysfunction. Do you know that?
Yeah. And Dewey does see that, like, he may have stepped over the line.
Yeah. He apologizes, and she and they make up.
Yeah.
But I'm just like, you guys.
Hey guys, that's not going to stop. You're going to do that
forever until he dies.
Until Dewey dies, yeah.
Yeah. But I love that for you.
But it's so enduring. They're so cute and like
I love their relationship.
I do too. And like even when they're like together, and I think they do spend a brief period of time in this franchise technically married.
Yeah, and having just sort of like a domestic life together.
Yeah, but then like they do get divorced, and like Gail moves on and like becomes more successful in her career.
Yeah.
But like they do always maintain like a certain amount of love and like an affection for one each other.
They never fall out of love for each other.
Even though there's no way that their relationship could withstand very much at all.
Yeah. Because they just kind of like are at the root just very different people, except for when they're in high stress situations, and then they can be aligned. Though I also do want to talk a little bit about both of their relationships with Sydney too, because I think those are also interesting.
Yeah,
like I think that the first thing Sydney says about Gail in this movie really is like, be kind. She saved our lives, but she says it in a way where it's like, we have to be kind to her because she saved our lives, but I'm not happy about it either. Yeah. And it's just like they continue to go on to this like arc in these films where it's like it or not, they are a team. Yeah, it's
they're just kind of victims of circumstance.
And like even when they don't like each other, there's like a trust between them.
Yep.
Like there's a moment where we're supposed to think that maybe because Nancy leads.
Gail comes out first, making us for a split second think that Gail is one of the killers.
But even Sydney is like, Gail? Yeah. And Gail just shakes her head, and like Sydney seems to accept it, and then like a couple minutes later is handing her a gun because like they trust each other even if they don't like each other.
Well, because this is a sequel, right? They've done this before.
Like they're the ones who really get it. I know Dewey and Randy get it too.
Yeah,
but there's something about the way that like it feels like Randy and Dewey get it in the sense that they're like, okay, we know the outline, we know what we have to do to end this. Whereas Gale and Sydney seem to be coming more from a place of like, this is going to keep happening forever.
Yeah. And well, because Randy and Dewey, as long as they survive in this franchise, don't see those final scenes.
That's true.
Right?
And I was also thinking
and
about
Gale and Sydney do.
I was also thinking about how they aren't ever really until like the very end when Dewey dies targeted. They get themselves into it.
That's
like
true.
Dewey shows up, you know?
Yeah.
But like Sydney is targeted.
Yeah.
And I think to an extent Gale is targeted in this one too. There's some sort of I think Nancy is a little bit focused on Gale.
Yeah.
For being the one who wrote the book and all of that. It's like never explicitly said.
Well, and also she's got the alter ego Debbie Salt, where
who's
she's like also a
specifically
journalist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see that first shot we get of her? She's in the background during a Gale scene. And she has so much hate on her face.
Ooh.
And then she comes up a second later and she's like, a bumbling fangirl.
Yeah, she's like, oh, Gale Weathers.
And I'm just like, yeah, she fucking hates Gale. Gale was going to get targeted in this.
Yeah.
Whether she wanted to or not.
And then Gale.
Whereas Dewey could have just stayed away.
Gale is kind of a dick to her.
Gale is really a dick to her.
Yeah.
Gale's not a nice person.
Kind of a dick. Yeah.
I love her, but she's not a kind person.
No.
And then Sydney and Dewey have a very different relationship.
Yeah.
I did kind of love that when Dewey is first like reintroduced to Sydney, we have the moment where like the boyfriend is sort of jealous or like who's that guy?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, that's her dorky
It's
big
Dewey,
brother.
dude.
It's
Yeah.
Dewey. He bumbles. Don't worry about him.
Yeah, because Derek never met Tatum.
I know. And
Yeah.
I do wonder, I always go back to like, how much is Dewey and Sydney's relationship actually about Tatum, despite the fact that they never fucking talk about Tatum?
No, not
It
a
fucking
once.
breaks my heart that Tatum
Yeah.
like never gets mentioned. Did you
Yeah.
catch the one mention
Tatum
of her?
erasure.
Did you catch one mention to Tatum?
There was one?
Yes, it was when right before Randy gets or answers Gale's phone rather and gets the phone call where he gets killed. In that scene, they do mention all the people who died before because they're trying to be like, who is going to get targeted next?
Yeah.
Let's go over the people who died the first time, like the principal and blah, blah, blah. And then like
Himbry.
Gale kind of like
Tatum.
hesitates for a moment and then kind of quietly says Tatum's name. And then the camera goes to Dewey and he like looks away, kind of like almost a flinch.
Yeah.
And it like, breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Like he can't even hear Tatum's name. Like he can't look at it straight on.
Yeah.
And I do wonder how much of Tatum's erasure in these films actually is because like neither him nor Sydney can really look at it straight on.
Deal. Yeah.
Like I feel like him especially, like he's such a protector figure and he's so protective of Sydney.
Yeah.
How much of that is because he was supposed to protect Tatum?
Yeah.
And he failed.
And I wonder if Sydney feels that way too. Like
Yeah.
the way that she maybe feels like she should have been able to be there and protect Sydney.
Yeah.
And then then of course that turning into, her motivation to like reveal who the killer is and go back, that ends up resulting in her new best friend's death.
Yeah. It is interesting. Yeah. I don't know. They have talk about the trauma bonding when it comes to Dewey and Sydney.
Yeah.
And I also do just sprinkling in a little bit of a whatever for my literary corner. I also think one of Cassandra, the character that she plays in the theater, like one of her main things to me is that she's the sister of Paris, who started the Trojan War, and all the other people in Troy, like the main family in Troy who are fighting against the Greeks. And she has to watch her whole family die. Like she is a sibling and a daughter. And I'm just like, I'm noticing things.
Interesting. Yeah. Do you have more thoughts on Mickey?
A little bit. I'm curious about what his mommy issues are.
Mickey's?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If he has, it seems like he does because of his relationship with who he calls Debbie. He calls her Debbie.
Right, yeah.
And like he has a line when he's talking about Sid's boyfriend, whose name I forgot again, Derek. When he's talking about Derek, where he's like, he's just the kind of boy you'd like to bring home to mom.
Yeah.
If you had a mom. And I'm like, what is your life?
Your fucking
Who is
problem?
your mom?
Yeah.
Like, who is your mom? And I also feel like, he's definitely our Stu, where he has those moments. Like, we had that scene in the first Scream where Stu is sort of talking about the murders and getting a little too explicit, and Tatum's kind of giving him a hard time about it.
Tatum?
I think so.
Yeah.
In the first one.
Oh, yeah. They found her liver in the mailbox.
Yeah, that shit. And then in this one, we have Mickey being like, the girl was stabbed seven times. And like somebody has to be like, dude, not the time nor the place.
It's called tact, you
Yeah,
fuck
yeah.
rag.
So like, So I definitely get the idea that like, I'm not sure he would have gone involved in these. I mean, he definitely wouldn't have gotten involved in these murders if it wasn't for Nancy pulling him into them. Maybe he still would have committed some murders, but it wouldn't have been these ones.
He still probably would have committed some violence.
And it's very
way.
the same ideas with like Stu. Stu had no reason to kill Sydney's mom that first time. You know? His later murders, he had more reasons to, but it just seems like, a lot of the motive is like Billy's. Like Loomis and lackeys, like I said.
Yeah. And they do share, Mickey and Stu and Billy. They don't share motive, but or maybe they do, but like they share their like it's the thing that happens in horror movies and a lot of other movies where the villain over explains their plan. And they're like, now that I have your attention and there's no possible way you could escape, let me tell you
everything. Here's how I'm going to get off. Here's what I'm going to tell the jury. Here's the lawyers I'm going to hire.
Exactly. And so they have, I think both of them in both of these movies, they have this fantasy that they're like, we're going to blame the media.
Yeah. Stu has this whole thing about like
movies.
Peer pressure and like he has all these excuses for why he's going to get off.
Yeah.
Even if he does get caught and he doesn't really care. And Mickey's just like that. And I think Mickey has more faith in his arguments than he should.
Yeah, he's a little over secure.
But he's already seeding it. Like when he's in the film class, he's already being like, well, obviously these murders are just imitating the film. Obviously it's the film's fault. Yeah. I shouldn't call it a film. It's a horror movie. It's Stab.
It's Stab. Yeah.
Stab is not a film. But anyway, he's saying that while he knows there's a personal connection there and it's not just about the movie, So like he's already trying to seed it in. He's also very good about being like, oh, well, it could be that person, like putting little like red herrings around and stuff. Like
right. Well, that's what Randy does, right? Like Randy is like, well, it could be Mickey, but if it's Mickey, then it could also just as easily be me.
Yeah.
So let's not do that.
Yeah. And it's like, maybe Randy, we could circle back to that. Yeah. I mean, Randy is also the one who figures out really that it's Nancy Loomis because in the first film, of course, they talk about their what's your favorite movie thing. And it ends up being like the little quiz, the last quiz that she gets wrong is about how the killer in Friday the 13th is Mrs. Voorhees, not Jason.
Not Jason, not in the first one. Yep.
And conveniently, the movie within a movie, when we get that opening scene in the movie theater, when Omar and Jada Pinkett are going to get killed, Maureen and Phil, when they are going to get killed, they leave that what's your favorite movie part out. It's not a part of the Stab movie.
That's right.
Or at least not while we're in the theater to see it.
Yeah, because they like go off to the bathroom.
Yeah, so it might be there, but we don't see it. But we do get a Mrs. Voorhees name drop when Randy is laying out those suspects. Specifically because he's talking about the roommate, Hallie.
Yeah.
Where he's like, it could be a lady. Yeah. That would be a black lady? What a reversal, just like Mrs. Voorhees. And then right after that, he's like, it could be Gail. Reporters are all about setting up the news and making the news happen. And I'm like, oh, baby. Put these points together.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
You're almost there.
Yeah. But anyway, back to Mickey.
Yeah.
I think the main interesting thing about Mickey is just sort of like what he brings up with about the theme of like the meta theme of like, where is movie, where is reality?
Yep. Yeah.
And Mickey's argument is sort of like, I couldn't tell the difference. The movie inspired me and I couldn't help it.
Or the violence in the films is
the cause.
The catalyst for my violent actions.
And
right?
like, I do think that there is a sort of like difficult relationship there with horror movies in general, like the sadistic voyeurism that comes in all horror films. Like it is there. Mm-hmm. And us as horror film critics must acknowledge it.
Yeah.
But also the idea of like, I think it's Sarah Michelle Gellar's character who talks about life imitating art or art imitating life. Mm-hmm. And like, which way is it? Or do they just sort of like feed off each other constantly and just like this feedback loop that never really ends?
Yeah, because exactly. Like they've got this, the movie that exists in their universe, Stab, that has the relationship to the actual Woodsboro murders.
Yeah.
And then there's, a movie about it. And then also this copycat killer. Right?
Yeah.
And then,
it's like, it kind of reaches a point where it's like, where the movie becomes too real because it's based on these real events and all of that. But also reality is becoming too artificial to the point where like the people in the movie theater couldn't tell that she was actually being murdered.
Exactly.
That it makes like the problem isn't that like people are imitating. The problem isn't just that people are imitating movies. The problem is that real life is becoming too fake.
Yeah.
to be able to tell the difference. Like they're both part of the problem or something.
Yeah, the kind of blurred lines between art and real life.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and then, with that movie within a movie, that's how this movie does like a self-parody. you
Yeah.
know? Which, it does, I think, is part of that meta self-awareness, right?
Yeah.
So like they've got this movie Stab that's like poking fun at sequels and slasher movies, right?
Yeah.
And then we see in the is it in the first one where they asked like, who would you want to play you if this was made to a movie?
Yeah, she makes the joke
And
about like
Sydney's
they
like,
probably cast Tori Spelling.
And then they do. And
Yeah.
it's so good.
Yeah.
And then with what we get to see in Stab, Heather Graham is Casey Becker.
Yeah.
And is Luke Wilson Billy
Yes.
or something?
Trying to be really emo about it.
so good,
Oh
yeah.
my god.
Well, I'm also thinking, thinking again about the first one, that a theme in the first one was technology. And we get a little bit of an extension of it. This is kind of how I feel about this movie in general, is that we get a continued extension of the themes from the first one into the second one, but they just feel like a little bit like, just like go check the box.
Yeah, kind of like their character work. None of the characters in this film are as like fleshed out as in the first one.
Yeah, and
like
that
the new
is
ones.
honestly probably my biggest problem with that film class scene. It's like, it's this one scene where like the work in that one scene needs to be spread out across several scenes, but it's like the first scene after that opening scene where Maureen and Phil are dead. All of the characters that matter are in that same film class, right?
Yeah,
and
pretty much.
And it's just like, I can just envision that just like insufferable undergrad film studies class.
I know.
Where that
like I gotta say,
like
it
Mickey
did feel like a real class.
a kid like Mickey and a kid like Randy just being like, I already know everything.
I'm gonna say everything that I have in my mind,
and
I'm
I've
never
already
gonna shut
seen
up.
every movie, including sequels.
And there's gonna be one chick who's trying to be the cool girl and get
Yeah.
in on the conversation, but none of the guys are really gonna listen to her.
Exactly. Who happens to be Cece, right?
Yes.
She's there for some reason. She's in the film studies class as well, right?
I think
And
just to
even the
further introduce her.
even the professor is just useless. Like,
And
I'm
why
like,
is he even having this conversation
what is the point
here?
of your discussion today?
Yeah. Why are you letting these kids go off about people that like went to your school who died
And then
who were murdered
not only
yesterday.
that, but then he like asks like, oh, so what are you insinuating that blah 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 blah? And he's just like, what? I'm like, you're the adult in this room. Why are you allowing this conversation to happen?
No, yeah, you should not be having this conversation.
And so like but
I kind of understand wanting to like address it in some way, and like it's always sort of interesting to talk about how much film and like video games and all that affects violence in our culture, blah blah blah, or whether it's a reflection of, like, that's an important conversation to have in film school, but like not when your co-eds just
on that day,
like died yesterday.
Yeah,
like some of these people might know them.
Yeah, exactly. And just like, so there's so much that like that scene is so important because so much happens where they like establish
this is what a sequel
idea
is.
of a sequel, right? And
This
like
is what a sequel does. The kill count is bigger.
Yeah.
The deaths are more elaborate.
and then they mention Terminator 2 and Aliens and Godfather, like they're just name dropping sequels,
Yeah.
And I'm like, this needs to be spread out. It's like everything in this one scene, check, we've established it, but then it does not come back for like another 90 minutes because this is almost a 2-hour movie.
Right, yeah.
And I'm like, I need this sprinkled. Like, this needs to be a little bit more intentional, and it just felt a little like heavy-handed.
Yeah, I feel
did
like
not
in
like
the first
it.
film we got the Randy like little truth drops sort of more sprinkled throughout, and when we got the big one about the rules of horror film, we were already like halfway through the film, so we were already like, okay, this is a horror film. We're in it, you know?
Can I also tell you another scene that I thought was really cringy?
Yeah.
Is the scene in the cafeteria where Derek
Why does
sings
that
to Sid.
happen?
Why does that even happen?
Okay, so I did see one thing that's like he's wearing a similar outfit to the outfit that Billy is wearing when he comes in through the window in that romantic scene, quote unquote romantic scene, where he's just trying to get in her pants.
Okay.
And overstep her boundaries, you know? So it's supposed to be like a red herring thing of like we're supposed to kind of be thinking of Billy and his romantic gestures.
Yeah.
And like that he kind of looks similar because of the clothes or something.
Derek's romantic gesture is very public.
And out of nowhere.
Like, why does this happen? And then like that's when he gives
the
Sydney
necklace,
his letters. Yeah. And like, but it's just so funny because he's singing and like everybody's like, woo, you know, it's like this big public, and he's kind of like making a fool of himself a little bit, you know, like this big public, you know, proclamation of his love for Sydney. And Sydney's just like, that's cool, I guess.
Yeah, I know.
And like kisses him. And I was like, okay. And I'm just like, yeah, Sydney's like,
I mean, I guess he thought it would like show that he was there for her and like comfort her while she's going through all of this. But I'm like, maybe she feels like she's already in the spotlight.
Yeah.
So let's not. Maybe let's make this a private moment.
Yeah. Why do that?
Yeah.
It's just, it's pretty obvious.
There's a few moments where they're trying to make Derek seem like a red herring or whatever, but they don't quite land.
Yeah, I think Derek is kind of a wasted character a little bit.
Kind of like the roommate, Hallie.
Kind of like Hallie, because like it's funny
Again,
because
kind of checking boxes. You need to have the boyfriend who could be the killer because it was last time.
Yeah.
And she needs to have the best gal friend.
She's got to. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting because like I just don't think Sydney. It just doesn't seem like she really has that much love for Derek.
No,
like
it just sort of seems like she just has a nice, stable guy, and that's nice.
Yeah, she's
and
in
I like
college
that for
and
her.
she's dating, and
you know, and that's great. And it's definitely not Billy.
No, yeah, exactly.
Even with him not being a murderer, that was not the best relationship. But also, it was a high school relationship. So, and now she just has like a college relationship. She's just dating some frat guy who's kind of annoying, but means well.
Yeah.
And like is very loyal and there for her.
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to. Sorry, I didn't talk about technology.
Oh yeah. Circling back,
a couple of things, right? Because again, like in the first movie, we have a theme of technology,
yes.
and I think it kind of a little bit is extended into this film. We already talked about how Sydney.
Is this true that this is the only one that doesn't? The opening scene with the opening person getting killed, they don't interact through like a phone call.
Oh,
I hear this is the only film in the Scream franchise where that happens.
I think so.
I've only seen most of them once, so I cannot confirm. Anyway,
Sydney has caller ID now. We already talked about that.
Yeah.
And then we have the Gail and Dewey reviewing camera footage.
Yeah,
that kind of technology.
And I do think there's like a comment on technology and the fact that we open with the movie theater and then we close with the stage theater. You know,
that's true.
Of like growing technology and how we tell stories.
It's also worth noting that they do mention that these killers, that Nancy Loomis and Mickey, met on the internet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which again, Scream 5, that's how they met and have their grooming situation. So like it's definitely a reference to that, I think.
And I mean, but of course, you know, Scream 5, was that like 2021 or 2022?
Yeah.
This is 1997.
So this is fresh internet message boards.
Of two people being able to meet and have a relationship outside of the internet.
Yeah.
Because of the internet. That's a very interesting
little... When did they meet? Did she go looking for people who were
at
Sydney's school?
No, they just met on a message board.
Or did he go to the school? I'm just wondering, my question is, how did he end up coincidentally at the school where Sydney goes?
Right.
Was he already there and that's why Nancy targeted him? Or did him and Nancy start talking first and then she figured out where Sydney was going and was like, hey, you should apply there too?
Yeah, I don't know.
What I mean?
I just know that they're...
And when did he start getting close to them? Before or after him and Nancy made this plan? Like, how much was he targeted by Nancy?
Yeah.
And how much did he target them? I guess is my question.
Yeah, I don't know.
have questions.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they just met on like a message board about the Woodsboro murders.
Yeah.
Right? And...
Though maybe he got into the murders because he's already become friends with Sydney and heard about it?
Right, or at least like probably first understood the situation through Randy, since they both seem to have so many common interests. Right,
yeah. And he seems to be friends with Derek too, for some reason.
He also seems to be friends with Derek.
Yeah.
Are they in the same frat? I have
no idea. Is he in a frat? I don't know.
Not a clue. Yeah.
Yeah. There are a few gaps in this movie.
A few.
And I feel like the gaps in the first one were sort of like subtextual and you could sort of imagine them and it was like juicy.
Yeah.
Like what was Stewie and Casey's relationship like, you know? Like why was Casey targeted? You know, like there are little things like that. Whereas in the gaps in this one, I'm sort of like, I would love to know actually the answer to that.
Yeah.
I don't want to speculate. I want to know if Mickey targeted them or if Nancy targeted Mickey. That would tell me a lot about both of those characters.
Yeah, what happens in what order. Yeah.
Yeah. Well then, since we're already kind of talking about the themes and like the the line between reality and fiction. I think it is a good time for
literary corner, play within a play.
I love when it gets real jazzy.
Okay.
Yeah. So play within a play, also known as an embedded narrative.
Love it.
Because it's not always a play.
Right. It's not.
Yeah. It could be a story within a story. You know, like there's all sorts of things it could be.
Yeah.
Like movie within a movie. And they've been around for a long time, and they're used for different reasons. Like, I think you can't ignore the fact that they're often useful just for, like, entertainment value, right? Like, they can be funny and, like, kind of satirize things like Stab does.
Yeah.
Right? Or they can also just be, like, a good way to deliver backstory and lore and stuff. Like, that happens a lot, too. Again, Stab reminds us of what happened in the first movie, right?
Right.
But I think sort of, like, maybe not more important, but another important thing that an embedded narrative does is that it sort of like either satirizes or highlights the themes of the like main text and sort of like shows a truth at the heart of the story. And that's like really what Cassandra's monologue is all about, you know? But it also is a little bit what Stab does. Certainly the satirizing part, but also just sort of like, I'll get to it. First, a brief literary history.
Okay.
Obviously embedded narratives kind of go back to classic frame stories that we've talked about a little bit, like Canterbury Tales or the Mahabharata or like the Decameron, where it's like, here's a story about people telling stories, right? But I think the way we think about it is more like one little story within a bigger story rather than like
a vignette.
Yeah, like, I don't know, like the Jabberwocky and Alice in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass. I don't remember.
That one. Yep.
But like the big one, I think, is the play within the play that we get in like Shakespeare. Like
I'm thinking about Hamlet.
Yeah, he does it in Hamlet. He does it in Midsummer's Night Dream.
Yeah,
I think he does it in Love's Labour's Law. Like he does the thing. I think Hamlet is the one that's most interesting for our purposes because it is about a son trying to avenge the murder of his father. By committing a bunch more murders, many of which are not related to the man that he's trying to murder.
Yeah.
You know, which is like, okay, here we have a mother trying to avenge her son by killing a bunch of people, you know? And it's certainly, Hamlet is certainly known for its mommy issues. So we also have that through line. But also, before the play is performed in Hamlet, Hamlet has one of the players recite a monologue as Hecuba. Hecuba is the queen of Troy, mother of Cassandra.
Oh.
And it's the scene where she's like, sees her husband die and is grieving him. Because, you know, the whole family of Troy has to watch each other die and then they die, you know. So just, you know, keeping that in mind. But let's talk about Stab, because we do start with that movie within a movie, which is just like a schlocky retelling of the quote unquote true events.
Which then also does become a franchise in the film. Yeah.
And I do love the ways that they make fun of themselves, but also more specifically make fun of like other horror films.
Yep.
By showing like what is different about Stab versus what they actually did in Scream, because we have that same first scene with Casey Becker. Which makes me wonder if Gail's story also starts with Casey Becker.
Kind of, because Casey Becker is getting in the shower.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. They specifically change it so that she's not just making popcorn and settling in for a movie.
Yeah, she's got to do something sexy.
Taking a shower, but also making popcorn.
Girl,
that's going to burn. That's going to burn.
It's going to catch on fire.
Yeah, no, so that's stupid. But yeah, it literally is just because like horror movies love to have a sexy part. But the Scream movies don't have sexy parts, really. Not in that same way. The first one does a little bit. This one, we were talking about it when we were sort of thinking about archetypes. It's a little devoid of sex.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no sex scenes in the second one.
No, nobody's having sex.
I mean, Sydney and Derek share that kiss.
Yeah.
And that's kind of
And
it.
Dewey and Gale make out a bit.
Oh, that's right.
That's
before Dewey gets stabbed.
Yeah. So maybe he's the whore of the film.
Maybe.
And then we already talked about like, you know, the audience of this film, our audience surrogate being like a black woman who's like, here's some critiques I have.
Yeah.
You know? But our movie is different. But like, it's not really.
But it's not, yeah.
But yeah, the rest of the audience are awful. They're just
awful.
rowdy, horrible horror fans.
Yeah.
They got the costumes and they're just so loud.
Yeah.
And I just like, I'm wondering what that says about like the assumed fans of horror.
Yes, I had questions about that. I was like,
is that what they think horror fans are like?
Exactly. That's exactly what I thought. Like, is this audience in the opening scene what like non-fans think horror
fans.
genre fans are like.
Because they're all in it for like, stab, scary mask,
But
stab.
it is also something that I found interesting
Yeah.
about that is that when Maureen and Phil show up to the theater,
Yeah.
that person who works there hands them the costume.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, it's from the studio. It's like merch. It's,
Yeah.
yeah. And so it's kind of interesting that there's sort of, to me in that scene, there's a criticism of like
The studios
and these companies making a lot of money
Yes.
from mass audiences off of what is like true crime exploitation.
That was totally what I thought too. And
Yeah.
I thought that really when Maureen is kind of like, okay, I'm a little over this. I'm going to go get popcorn.
Yeah.
And she's standing in line and she's standing behind some girls who are
I would
talking
be
about
way
it.
overstimulated if I were in that movie theater. There's no way I would stick around.
They even had the schlocky thing of like the ghost face coming down into
It's
the
a lot.
audience. It's a lot. It's
yeah.
a whole lot. There's glowing. Their knives are day glow or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's a lot.
And
But no.
they're just yelling and screaming and
know,
shouting.
calm
Like even
down.
when the movie starts, I'm like, shut up. I'm like
And
trying
then
to
when
watch this
she
movie
is
now.
like, when she is like, oh no, girl, get out of there, or whatever she says, other
They
people
shush
shush her. I was like, oh, so you're also saying who is not a horror fan?
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like girls are not horror fans.
Yeah.
Especially black girls.
Yeah.
You know?
Especially Maureen.
But we also see the girl outside who's a white girl talking about how like
it's real.
yeah, how she's like, this is like kind of too much for me because
Yeah.
like some kids in California actually died.
Yes.
And that was the moment, that made me definitely think of like, what does that say about the people taking delight in this?
Yes.
And what does it say about the people making money off of this?
Deciding that this is something they
Yeah.
can commodify. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then going back to the thing about how like our audience doesn't notice that somebody's being murdered in front of them.
Yeah.
She gets stabbed.
They think it's part of it.
7 times.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, at first they're too busy pretending to stab each other.
Yeah.
Because like everybody's just stabbing each other.
Because they've all got these fake knives
Yeah.
and they're just
there's
freaking
literally-
out about
okay.
it. Yeah.
Which is a recipe for disaster, even without a murderer loose.
Exactly.
But like it felt very like some sort of comment, even though this was before true crime really boomed.
I mean, true crime is
Has always
yeah.
since time immemorial.
Yeah.
But like our current true crime is like very, very saturated.
Yeah.
But even back then it was like just the amount of violence we have makes us sort of desensitized to it.
Yeah.
Because Cindy is like, 300 people watched and nobody did anything because they thought it was a publicity stunt.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's because they just don't, that reality is becoming skewed and that's blended with the fiction. But it also did make me think of the bystander effect.
Yeah.
Which of course is a myth, right? It's been sort of like, that's not how things really happened.
Yeah. There's a lot of other influences that impact
There were no streetlights. Yeah.
choices people make. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting because in this case, it's not that they didn't care.
Yeah.
It's that they literally just
Didn't
didn't understand that something was going on.
What's one thing that I think about is that like that movie theater is packed.
Yeah.
So certainly Phil and Maureen are sandwiched in by people. And
Yeah.
so when quote unquote Phil comes back.
Yeah.
And Maureen is talking to him and then, kind of
Notices
starts
the
to
blood.
realize that it's not him. Like, is there not somebody right next to her that should be like, holy shit,
Right.
I don't
but
know.
they're so just, I guess, focused on themselves. I don't know. I do know in Agamemnon, which is the play that Sydney is in, playing Cassandra.
Yes, because it's not called Cassandra.
No, it's about, it's called Agamemnon.
And
do
you know what that means? I'm
Yes.
literally asking.
Oh, yeah.
Are you
I'll
going to
get to
tell
it.
me?
It's a
Okay.
character. Agamemnon is a character.
Oh, okay. I'll just wait.
Yeah. But in the scene in the play Agamemnon, when Agamemnon and Cassandra are being stabbed off screen, they're literally getting stabbed off screen. The chorus, how they always have the Greek chorus who
Yes,
comments on
got
things.
to.
They're talking to each other kind of like, oh, seems like something's going on in there. Maybe somebody should, do you want to go do something? I don't want to do
I
something.
don't think it
I
should
don't
be
think I
me.
should go do
Yeah.
it. So they kind of do like a similar thing where they're just kind of like too cowardly to stop it, which is very bystander effect, you know? But I love that they do notice it. They do realize it's real once Maureen stands up on the stage and looks out at them. And I love that shot of her in front of the screen where she just is like,
She's got blood on her hands.
yeah, and it almost looks like, she looks horrified and murdered, but she also looks like there's something sort of accusatory in it.
Yeah.
Kind of. And like she's making them witness her murder. Like they can't ignore it anymore. And it also felt very, very tragic figure, very Cassandra. Cassandra's big thing is that like She told people what was going to happen. She saw the future, and nobody believed her.
It's my understanding she was cursed by Apollo.
But I just was really thinking of that with Marine, where it's like nobody believes her screams until it's too late.
Yeah.
Like nobody believes Cassandra's prophecies until it's too late.
Yeah.
And then the only other movie within a movie scene we get is the one that's Sid and Billy talking about their moms.
Yeah.
Which I think really is just there to be like, remember how Billy had a mom? And she ran off.
Yeah.
And we don't know what happened to her. Remember that?
Yep.
But also, like, it's happening at the same moment that Randy is laying out the suspects and mentions Mrs. Voorhees and mentions reporters. So it's like, it's a very classic, like, fool archetype moment where he is seeing the truth. He is understanding, but he doesn't realize he's understanding.
Yeah.
So that's like a good moment.
Yep.
But yes, let's talk about the actual play that happens. Yes. Agamemnon. It's the first part of a trilogy called Orestia by Aeschylus. And that is just a play about the aftermath of the Trojan War. So if you know your Greek mythology, it's that era. Agamemnon is specifically the brother of, he's the brother-in-law of Helen. Who gets kidnapped by, or goes willingly, who knows, with Paris, So he's the brother-in-law. So he's kind of the one who rallies all of Troy. Like, he's really considered, like, a main general, or rather, all of Greece. He's considered, like, a main general of Greece. And, like, in a way that some people kind of blame him for all the people who die, But one of its main themes is, like over the course of the trilogy, where it's about Agamemnon, and then it's about, like, Clytemnestra, his wife, and it's about their kids. One of the main themes across the trilogy is that, like, there's a difference between getting personal revenge and getting justice. And, like, because it goes from people just sort of, like, killing each other to get revenge to the final one being all about a trial.
Right.
And obviously that brings up obvious thoughts of, like, revenge and stuff that I'm going to get into with Nancy. But it also really did make me think about Cotton. Again, Cotton Weary. Because, like, what do we see actually what does the court and law enforcement actually do in this film? Basically just imprison the wrong guy for a while. That's kind of all they do.
Nothing good. Yeah.
Like, the Orestia is very much about, like, seeking personal vengeance is wrong. We got to do things, like, within a reasonable, lawful court, Whereas this one is sort of like, nah, the court doesn't work. But also, Sydney just sort of killing people who try to kill her doesn't work too, because that doesn't make it end either. So what does stop all of it? Like, is there any way for peace? Like, neither revenge nor justice seem to lead to it. What is justice? I don't know. It's asking some interesting questions.
Yeah.
So my thoughts on the director are that
Does
he was
he ever get a name?
I don't know. He's just the professor.
He's the professor.
He's directing the play, and he talks about Cassandra, and he's, like, talking about why Sydney's perfect for the role. And he's like, she saw it all coming. The wars, the murder, the madness. She knew she was cursed. It was her fate, and she embraced it. And I'm like, and you want Sydney to do this?
Yeah, right?
This is what you're thinking makes Sydney, like, you want Sydney to be embracing this fate? I do remember the first time I watched this movie, I was like, is the professor the killer?
Oh, yeah. But he's only in it for that one scene.
I know. I do think it could have been an interesting film if they had changed it and he was the killer, but no, he's not the killer. But I hated him so much because it's like, then the staging is literally a bunch of people in cloaks and white masks.
Yes.
With daggers.
Yes.
Running around and chasing her and taunting her. And I'm like, maybe you should have listened to her when she said this was a little bit much and she needed to step out for a while.
Right.
Maybe.
I don't think we had the word trigger in our vocabulary
but
yet.
It seems obvious. But
Yeah.
no, especially since he's literally like, take your pain and let it fuel your art. So he's like, he's aware that this is painful for her.
Yeah.
And he's like, and that's a good thing. I'm glad you're in pain.
Oof.
Get on stage.
Yeah.
I don't know. It felt very like all those like what pain is art worth?
Yeah.
And like how much pain?
How much should we suffer for our
And
art?
is there other ways to make art that maybe don't cause pain?
Yeah.
And like all those stories about how Van Gogh, like his depression led to his best art. And it's like, that's not true.
No.
A lot of his best art was when he was in like mental facilities.
Yeah.
And getting treatment and stuff. And like
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah. All of that stuff is going on in there, which is interesting. I do think it's also interesting that this director is staging a very straightforward Greek production. It's got like pretty classic looking set.
Yeah.
I mean, they have updated technology, but otherwise, like, there's no irony, there's no meta commentary, like, there's nothing that the Scream films are known for. It's like, we are going to be as straightforward and true to the original as possible.
Boring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. But the main part of this is that Cassandra has a big speech that's mostly focused on like how she's blameless.
Yeah.
Like she didn't commit any crime or sin.
It was fate.
But like, yeah, like her whole family died, her home fell. She's the only one left. She's like the original final girl.
Yep.
And like the chorus even starts talking about how she's all alone, which to me was very much like, yes, Sid and isolation. That's the main theme.
Yes.
There it is.
Yes.
And it's even like, it's immediately after this scene where her boyfriend Derek comes in and she's like, I don't know. I kind of want to be alone right now. And he's like, that's not the answer. I'm like, I don't know. I feel like she kind of knows best a little bit. Do you think she imagined Ghostface being there, or that was actually like Mickey in a mask? Or Nancy? I always kind of thought she imagined it. But
I can see it being Mickey, though.
But yeah, I feel like the Scream franchise doesn't do things of people like imagining things, you know?
Yeah.
Unless you count the requels. They get a little into that. But like, it probably makes more sense that it actually is Mickey or Nancy. Anyway, that's an aside.
Yeah.
Going back to, Fate and her boyfriend getting killed on that little star thing.
Yeah.
That star is what Fate comes down on.
Oh, okay.
And points at Cassandra and like condemns her. So it's like very much like, that is Sydney's fate. Her boyfriend and her friends
Will die.
They're all either going to be murderers or victims.
Yep.
And like, now she just has to embrace it. Her director said so. So like, it's kind of like, no wonder she starts the next film entirely alone.
Yeah.
Literally fate came down from above
Yeah.
and was like, here's your dead boyfriend.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, classic revenge plot. Nancy's motive is literally, you killed my son, now I kill you.
Yep.
Notably, Cassandra's whole storyline in Agamemnon is that she's on the side of Troy. When Troy loses the war, Greek warriors take a bunch of women as war prizes.
Sure, got to.
Agamemnon takes Cassandra,
Oh, I see.
brings her home. But not knowing that there was already a grieving mother back home plotting to murder Agamemnon.
Oh.
Because when Agamemnon set off to war, he sacrificed his daughter for good winds. So that their boats could take off.
Yeah.
He killed his daughter.
Yeah.
And so his wife, Clytemnestra, has not forgiven him for doing that.
Yeah.
Understandably.
She doesn't give a fuck that they won the war.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. She also has a lover now, so there's also that.
Oh,
But,
he's a
you know,
suitor. Yep.
But then here comes Agamemnon coming in with a war bride, you
Yeah.
know, sort of like war slave thing, you know. So here he is coming home as a hero, and like, so then Clytemnestra kills Agamemnon and Cassandra. But it's kind of like, Cassandra had nothing to do with it.
Cassandra do?
Yeah, she was just kind of like there. She just kind of got swept up into this whole conceit of like this grief of this mother. And like so much of this does go on to like the sins of the mother, I
Yeah.
guess. And like Sydney doesn't really have anything to do with any of it, but she gets swept up into it. Like Sydney has never done anything wrong in her life.
That's true. And
Even her killing Billy is like, well, yeah, he was killing her. What do you want?
yeah, and she does get like a lot of criticism for like her mother's behaviors. It's
Yeah.
like, she's not her mom. You
Yeah.
know? And
Like, sorry, her mom had an affair, which first off is like, not that big of a deal. That seems like a matter between her family, not you guys.
yeah, exactly.
You know?
And like,
And then the blame she gets for Cotton.
Yeah.
Like, she didn't put him in jail.
No.
Like, she gets blamed for all of this shit that is like, she's literally just there.
and it's like what's actually happening, and I think I see this with like the parallel with Cassandra is that things are happening to her.
Yes.
And like now it's her problem.
Yeah.
And it like then becomes her fate and like what she has to do for the rest of her life through really no fault of her own.
Yeah.
Which is a bummer, man.
Yeah. No, Cassandra's such a tragic figure.
Yeah.
The only last thing that I really have to say about the play within the play is that I do think it's cool that in the final scene, Sid is like using the stage to get away from Nancy. She's like pulling all those different levers.
Yeah.
And it's like, it was a very like, Sydney is aware of the fourth wall kind of moment.
Yeah.
Like she will use the setting against her, you know, her, like she will use, like Cassandra is using the walls of the castle to like that where she dies to instead protect herself or something. I don't know. There's something cool happening there and something meta happening there
Yeah.
that I don't know. I want to think about more because I like it.
I also just think I noticed in general that, yes, of course, they're doing this Greek tragedy play, right? But there just seems to be a general undertone of like a Greek theme and Greek influence throughout the entire movie. Like the frat culture.
Omega Beta Zeta.
The theater culture. It seems like they do a lot of Greek stuff.
I know. It's weird how straightforward their production was.
Seems
like,
boring.
Yeah. Like, what?
Yeah. But then also what it also made me think of is that I actually don't know if this is true because I don't really know that much about like ancient Greek culture, but I feel like it gets sort of tied to being very homosocial. You know, it's a very homosocial culture. And again, that makes me think of the fraternities and the sororities, right?
I do think there's also something interesting that's happening about like a sort of transition or like a contention between like a more matriarchy and mother-focused society and a patriarchy, father-associated society.
Again, thinking about the final girl, like they use these examples of final girls as they continue to, become mothers in their evolution of being a final girl.
There's some interesting stuff happening there. And just with Greece, like Greek theater being like what we sort of think of as like the beginning of theater, or it wasn't. And so like beginning, which is really like the beginning of movies. Yeah. And so it's like very meta.
Did you also catch that as Mickey is spilling his guts about everything, he calls trials theater? Like his psycho killer confrontation with Sid, he was like, trials are theater, Sydney.
Yes.
And it's just interesting that they're like
all about performance
in a theater.
And it's Nancy playing a role as Debbie Salt.
Yeah.
And it's all of that. Like everybody is a character in this movie. Because it's a movie, so they're all characters, but also there are people who are like playing characters and who see it all as theater or as movie, and that being Mickey's whole argument. Like, it's layered, it's textured.
Yeah, there's stuff here,
and then there's interesting the characters who don't realize that they're characters. You know, like you said with Sydney, sort of like not quite embracing the horror film.
Right, yeah, she doesn't really ever believe she's in a movie.
Though I feel like she does after this one, maybe.
Yeah.
I would have to rewatch the third one, but like she's a lot more closed off, a lot more projective, a lot more ready to fight.
Well, and also the third one literally has to do with a movie.
Has to do with a movie. Has to do with a stab sequel.
Yeah. We'll do the third one in 2027.
Yeah.
So keep an eye out for that one. I did a little research for my horror corner. Just about sequels, right? And so it's interesting because Scream, obviously, like what makes it, you know, sort of the keystone of the franchise is the self-awareness, right?
Right, yeah.
And it has self-awareness of the rules, just like in the first one. But now, of course, since this is the sequel, there are new rules, which Randy does lay out for us, right?
Yeah, but too early in the film. I think you're right.
Too early, yeah.
And like too much.
Yeah. So the sequel kind of...
Because I don't even remember what rules he says other than the kills are bigger. Like there's more kill. Okay, you got me.
Yeah,
I should have known.
The sequel seems, but like this sequel seems to branch out past the rules within the horror genre and sort of apply to all sequels. Like we're talking about The Godfather and Terminator 2.
The movies that they drop. Yeah, they mentioned Star Wars.
Yeah,
but that's different because it's part of a trilogy.
It's part of a trilogy.
Not
totally
knowing
planned.
That Scream is also a part of like a larger.
Yes. So here are Randy's rules of a sequel. Okay. Yes, there's a bigger body count and characters who survived the first movie are likely to die this movie. So we see that with Randy.
So he condemns himself without even realizing it. Another very fool move.
And also kind of Dewey, right? We get we think he's dead, right?
And that is why he dies in the requel. Because they need to show that they can kill
one of the main characters. Yeah. So, and just in general, there's more blood, more gore, more body count, right? And I think that this is particularly relevant in that scene where Sydney is trying to get away with her protective officers and Hallie, but then they die. And then, you know, they're in the car accident. It's gory. It's rough, man.
Where it's, and they even have Hallie like commenting on it, where she's like, "Oh, it's straight through his eye," or whatever.
It did. Yeah, it was awesome. And then them going over unconscious killer, you know.
Yeah.
To get out. And
also
just the whole
fact that it,
traffic thing.
Yeah, it seems so much bigger just sort of like in the area it's covering too. Where like the first one felt very like small town Woodsboro.
Yeah.
And this one's like, oh, you're in like a city.
Yeah.
They're driving places. They're movie theaters.
Yeah, they're all over the city.
Where, the first one's like residential homes, high school. That's it.
And then so what Randy says, he gets cut off. He says, and never, ever, and then he gets cut off.
Oh.
Right? But I learned this on Wikipedia that actually in one of the trailers, he does finish his thought, and it's never assume the killer is dead. Right, which is a good one. And that is a perfect setup for a trilogy, which, again, conveniently comes with another set of rules.
Right, yeah.
A trilogy, right?
I did hear that one of the possible endings, because they had a few different endings in mind, one of them for this film was to have, like, another ghost face watching Sydney from, like, the top of a building or something. To be very, like, and there will be a third one.
And there will be a third one, yes. Yeah, and then so we've got some sequel conventions that like I already mentioned a little bit, is like we get new information about the original film's mythology. So like we learn more about Cotton Weary, right? He comes back and is a little bit more of a character, right?
Yeah, and we definitely learn more about Nancy.
Yeah, and Billy's mom, who was absent from the first film, comes back.
Yeah, she's sort of a throwaway line.
And it's sort of her motivating factor.
Yeah.
Or rather, her absence was a motivating factor in Billy's murders.
Right,
and so now he's back, right?
And,
or she's back, right?
Yeah.
And that is really funny when Sydney's like, takes a beat and she's like, Mrs. Loomis?
Yeah.
And it actually is interesting that, like, Sydney and that character Debbie Salt never did interact with each other.
Debbie Salt is very careful about not interacting with most of the college people, honestly. Like, she mostly just goes after Gail.
Yeah.
And Gail never met her. She just saw her in pictures, so.
Yeah. And so I found this interesting article. Yeah, I was mentioning off mic that I was trying to find some like analysis of Scream 2, and there's just really not too much out there. A lot of it focuses on the original Scream, which makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But I did find a very interesting article.
I also wonder if there is stuff out there. It's just hard to find it because, like, how do you Google just Scream 2? You know?
Scream 2 analysis.
Yeah. Like, did you see that they had other possible names for Scream 2 that was like Scream Again, Scream Louder,
keep screaming. Yeah.
Scream Another Day.
But I found an interesting article from the Cornell Daily Sun. Mm-hmm. So this absolutely has some connection to the school Cornell.
Yeah.
The author is Eric Hahn. And this is a couple years ago. It's from February 2023, so it's a couple years ago.
He may have graduated.
He may have graduated, although when it was written, it does say that he was a freshman. Oh. So, but I don't know. It's Cornell, you know.
Yeah. Wishing you the best wherever you are.
Eric
in
Hahn,
your academic journey.
Hope you're doing great. Hope you're still writing analysis of horror sequels. So Eric Hahn mentions a few things that I think are very helpful. Again, like Scream 2, like prides itself on its self-awareness. And but it does, and this is kind of what I noticed when I was like looking for analysis. I was really just getting reviews, you know, and like some kind of.
It's always so hard to find people actually talking about things instead of just recapping things.
Yeah, and
I hate that.
Yeah, and I think kind of the general consensus from the resources I looked at was just that like this one falls a little short of expectation.
It doesn't quite live up.
But it's interesting because then it's very classic sequel. But then like there are people who think that Scream 2 is one of the best horror sequels ever made. Mm.
Though I feel like both those things could exist together.
Exactly.
It could be a best, because how many horror sequels are there that are like good?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and especially like as these horror, especially slasher franchises get into like 6, 7, 8 movies, like they kind of go through phases. Like they're good and then they dip, and then all of a sudden number 5 is amazing. It has no business being amazing, but it is. Yeah. So, and what Eric Hahn mentions is that sequels by nature are repetitive. Yeah. Which makes sense to me, right? And so like the audience, especially the audience for Scream, expects Scream 2 to accomplish what it did before again and also something else.
Right.
Yeah.
Because a part of what Scream accomplishes is that it like subverts expectations in its meta commentary.
Exactly. Yep.
And it does things that are surprising, like has 2 killers.
Yeah, that was like an interesting idea.
So
And
then how can you surprise but also do the exact same thing that you did last time? It's like a really difficult position to be in for a sequel.
Yeah. And then he writes Craven and Williamson because it's still directed by Wes Craven and the writer is still Kevin Williamson.
Yeah.
And he does not write number 3, but he does have a producer credit.
Yeah.
And then he comes back to write 4.
Is that true? I think that is true.
Yeah.
I also think it's interesting. I think part of maybe the problem where there's some like flatness in this one is that like it got greenlit while Scream was still in theaters.
This is
They
true.
wanted a quick turn.
It was a super quick turn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was like, get this movie out there.
Yeah. It says, and then this quote here says, Scream 2 recognizes that just as a horror sequel will repeat the tropes of its predecessors, the college experience will repeat the anxieties of high school. Yeah. Like, because that kind of is the big difference. It's like, you were in high school and now you're in college. That's the
but
sequel.
There's really no difference.
Yeah.
You still have your boyfriend. You still have your best friend.
Who are going to die.
Dewey still shows up for some reason.
Dewey and Gail are there. Well, and it's also worth noting that in Scream, Sydney deals with those mean girls. She deals with the cruel rumors about her mother and her boyfriend.
And that's like a main contention in this one.
And it keeps
There's
happening.
The sorority girls. Yep. There's the news people. They're making the movie. Yeah.
Yeah. And like
and the first one is like right after Gail's book comes out. And then this one's like right after the movie comes out. Gail's book about Cotton.
Yeah.
Weary. Not about the Woodsboro murders because those haven't happened yet. But like, you know, it's like Sydney is feeling very in the news.
Yeah.
At the beginning of both these movies.
Yeah. And then I like this, and I think this ties into what you were mentioning in your literary corner. It says, it's a grim lesson. You might hope to reforge your identity by leaving the troubles of home behind.
Oh, God, yeah.
But the image of your past will closely follow.
Yeah.
And then there's one other little quote that I also think goes with your literary corner very well, is that Sidney Prescott is the eternal final girl destined to face off against Ghostface time and time again. This sense of being trapped, unable to escape her identity as a harbinger of death haunts Sydney.
She is fated. She is cursed.
Yep. And that everyone around her will die.
I mean, that's another big thing about the Arestia is that it's about the curse on the House of Atreus. It's like they are cursed to just always be killing and dying.
Yeah.
You know? And it's like, Sydney is also just sort of like cursed. And there's like a lineage of murder. Yeah. That is happening. And that is another thing I thought about with Billy Loomis is just sort of like the women around him. Yeah. Sydney as the ultimate final girl who also kills him. His mother as like seeking vengeance against him. And then even with the requels, suddenly now we also have his daughter.
So he has a kid.
It's just sort of like Billy Loomis's lineage. Or like the women around Billy Loomis is just sort of like what it's all about. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. And then
the curse of Billy Loomis.
Right. But it's it's interesting because we've talked about this a lot, talking about slashers and how the final girl and the psycho killer are like kind of inextricably linked, right? And so like their destinies are intertwined, like they must face each other again and again and again, even though Ghostface will be a different person every time. The idea of Ghostface is,
and honestly the motives never changed that much either.
Not really. Yeah,
there is pretty much always some sort of aspect of like fame or like or revenge. I
didn't really realize how incredibly similar Mickey's motive is to Billy and Stu's. Yeah. I'm going to blame the movies. The movies and media are too violent and it's
not my fault. Yeah. And then like the revenge stuff, the sins of the mother. Yes. All of that shit coming into, and like those themes kind of continue.
I just feel though, like this is just what I was thinking about this entire movie is that like, why didn't Nancy, like, I understand that she chose to leave her husband and maybe that was the best choice for her, but like, why didn't
she also left her son?
She did abandon her son and like wasn't like, hey, I'm going to move over. I'm going to move in here for a little bit.
I'm going to get settled there. Then we'll figure out custody.
Yeah, she just like ghosts her teenage son.
And like certainly in the 90s, if she had brought that to a custody trial situation, like mothers tend to have.
Right. And so,
especially with the husband being the one who cheated.
Yeah. And then she's like, and then
Nancy, she has the audacity to be like, my Billy.
Yeah,
I'm here to get vengeance for my Billy. It's like, you weren't even fucking there.
Yeah, it's like
He was doing murders because you weren't there.
Yeah, like you owe your kid a lot, right? And then she does also
and
like
she thinks this can make up for it.
and Nancy gets like a little jab at Sydney about her mom again.
Yeah.
And it's just like, again, Sydney has no
nothing to do with your mom.
Yeah, has no
I mean, that's another
power
like,
over her mom's actions.
I don't know. It's like, yeah, Clytemnestra murders her husband to get revenge for like her daughter. And it's like, there are other things you could have, like, why did it get to the point where you needed to get revenge? I guess is my question, you know? It's sort of like, Nancy, why did it get to a point where you needed to get revenge for Billy? Maybe there were steps you could have taken before that.
Yeah.
Before you needed to go murder Sydney and a bunch of other random people.
She gets a makeover.
Yes, she does.
And
that
loses
was
a bunch of weight. That's what we get to find. That's what she's been doing.
Groom a college boy.
Yeah, Timothy Oliphant. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Should we play a quick game?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's make it quick.
Let's make it quick. So, extra quick. Do we want to go over, because
yes,
we decided that obviously it makes the most sense to play a game of archetypes,
and then had thought that we did this when we did the Scream movie, but we did not.
It would have been made perfect sense, but again, that was early days for us. It was third episode,
and I think we thought maybe it was kind of obvious the archetypes, because obviously Sydney's our virgin final girl,
obviously,
and they're specifically playing with that by having her sleep with Billy.
Yes.
Like, that is an explicit thing that they're doing.
Right.
Tatum is our whore who dies first out of, like, the people at the party.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, there are other people who die first, but, like, Tatum's the
her
whore.
death kind of kicks stuff off. I guess you could argue that Casey Becker is the whore.
I mean, or that Sydney's mom is the whore.
Or Sydney's mom, but like, she's not a character.
And when it comes to the archetype being fulfilled, Tatum is fulfilling all of that. Tatum is the one who does that. Check.
I mean, the prominent nipples alone.
The prominent limo. I think there's a little bit more fuzziness around the others. I think the safe thing to say would be Dewey is our athlete. He's always rushing in places and taking a lot of bodily harm, which is a trademark of athletes. Randy is our fool character who's there for the comic relief, but also is sort of like aware of things in the way that other characters aren't, and like sometimes sees the future kind of without realizing.
But other characters don't really take him seriously. Yeah.
And then Gail is our scholar who is sort of like putting things together. Like, Cotton didn't really do it. Yeah. There's some more going on here. I'm going to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
I do think there's an argument to be made for Randy being the scholar.
In this movie?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Because he is the one, I mean, he has those foolish tendencies. Mm-hmm. There's kind of like a weird duality in the same way that the virgin and whore have a duality.
Yeah.
There's like a triality between between the scholar and the fool, and then like the athlete, where like the scholar and the fool can get kind of blurry.
Yeah.
Whereas the athlete is very like in contrast to them.
Yeah.
You know, I think the scholar and the fool can serve similar purposes.
Yeah. Yeah, I have Randy as the scholar, but he does also give fool vibes.
Because he does, because it's that trait of knowing what is happening without realizing that he knows what's happening is fool.
And also the way that he's like pining after Sydney. Yeah. And there's just no way. Like, that to me is also very foolish of him.
But it could also be scholar with the like nerd thing.
Right.
You know, the nerd who doesn't get the girl.
Yeah.
You know, that's also scholar. And he is the scholar of, he's literally at school studying film.
Yeah.
Which is the scholar.
Is what he wouldn't never shut up about in high school. So he kind of gets that next extra step in his evolution. So he's kind of, before he dies.
And I do think Dewey has certain fool characteristics.
He's kind of foolish, yeah.
I mean, he does a lot in terms of being an athlete. But again, there's like an athlete fool kind of like blurriness of like imbibing of intoxicants. Not that we get that in this one, but that's like both a fool and an athlete tend to do those things. You know, there's like blurriness that I think is really clear in this film. Yeah. Because Dewey also has a few moments where he sort of sees things a little more clearly than we realize he does, and also moments where he just sort of seems like a bumbling fool.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of Dewey as the athlete because he does go down fighting and he does sustain the most physical injury. Yeah. And I mean, at least in the first one, we know that he has a past career in law enforcement, which is very athletic. He's
very
to me.
like go after it.
Yeah.
Like he is always charging into places, which is classic athlete. Like when Sydney's like, there's a person in there. The killer was in there. Yeah. Dewey's like, then I will be as well. Yes. I will also be there.
Yes.
And Gail also works as like a scholar still.
Yeah.
But
you had an interesting thought of her maybe as an athlete.
Yeah, because I also feel like she is very, like we said, with her being like very focused on just finding the truth and who cares about the consequences. Yeah. She is also very like focused on always moving forward and not really like thinking it through first, just like forward.
Yeah.
And like running into places.
Yeah.
But more running into places to find the truth, which I guess is more scholarly.
Hear me out. I think in this movie, I think Gail is the whore.
Yeah.
Hear me out. So, well, again, we were just kind of talking about that dichotomy between the final girl, the virgin, and the whore, right?
And Sydney and Gail.
And Gail, they kill Billy together.
Yeah.
They kill Mickey and Nancy together.
Yeah. They are throughout the films. They remain impossibly entwined, while still also being like opposites in interesting ways.
But here's my reason why I feel like she kind of gives whore vibes in the second one. Because like she is kind of the personification of this, like, we get this idea of like media trying to
media as whore.
The media is the whore. They're like the emotional manipulation of people and like exploitation of
I love that
real
life.
Thank you.
That's really cool.
Of real life things. Like, so my notes is like, she is the person that like she personifies this, but it's a larger theme in the film, is like she's trying to profit off this emotional manipulation of people, and exploiting a real life trauma of people she's connected to, and like it's her trauma, but it's not just her trauma,
right? But yeah,
it's Sydney's and Dewey's too.
There was that thing where when women first started being like novelists, there was this idea of like, and also when they started in the theater too, that like they were literally selling themselves, and therefore they were basically whores.
They were basically prostitutes. Yeah.
Like, what's the difference between sex work and selling your writing? Nothing.
And
so I also feel
what's
that
the difference
a little
between
bit.
sex work and expressing an emotion you're not actually feeling?
Yeah, nothing. Yeah. So I definitely feel that of like, the aspect of selling. Yeah, she's selling her story. Mm-hmm. How's that different than selling herself?
Yeah.
You know, and like it is, but also
is it though?
Yeah, because literally the only other, I was trying to think about any like sexuality in this film.
There's really
and it's like, we get the make out session.
Yeah.
With some boob action. Gasp. And then I was like, I guess, isn't her boyfriend, Derek, kind of shirtless or whatever?
Yeah, he's kind of ripped.
Yeah, so I guess he's kind of maybe a whore. Not really. He's the only one who engages in intoxicants, but that's not really by choice.
That's true. He's tied up and
then it's like, is it Cece? I mean, it's not Phil and Maureen.
No, I actually have Derek as my fool.
Yeah.
Just mostly because, like, who is this guy?
I mean, he's just not enough of a person to be anybody.
And, like, it just doesn't really seem like he, either because he's not capable of it or maybe because Sydney has a hard time communicating this to him. Like, he does not understand what this means to her and, like, what this experience
he seems
is
very
like.
Understanding, but also he's like,
how could he possibly understand?
Yeah. And it's like, she is telling you explicit things and you're saying that you know better than her.
Yes.
Which
very
I don't know.
And like also
her roommate does that too.
Yeah, he's in a frat. Yeah. That's not great to me.
And her roommate wants to be in a sorority, which is not great. So I mean, they could maybe be two sides of the same thing.
But then here was my question, and again, like Derek's just like who is this guy? He's just some guy. Is he an athlete? Does he play a sport?
He's pre-med.
But
is he going to be a surgeon? Because they're the athletes.
They are the athletes of the medical field. You're absolutely right. We don't find out because he dies.
Yeah.
And yeah, Sydney just doesn't seem to have anywhere near the kind of relationship with him as she did with Billy.
Kind of like in the first film, she has an interesting relationship with sexuality where she's kind of devoid of it.
Yeah.
Even when she has sex in the first film, she's not really like
super interested
into it.
In it. Yeah.
And we never really get any more from her on that. So even though she does have sex, she's still very much our virginal character.
She's just such the final
girl.
So
like it's hard to have any. Yeah.
That's what I wrote down in my notes, and I was like, okay, here's where the game is. We're going to do archetypes. And I wrote Sid, final girl. Easy.
Yeah. Yeah, she'll always be that.
Yeah. And
it's hard to name any of the other, like the new characters in any of these roles because I just feel like I never got to know them very well. And it's so much easier to make all these theories about like why Randy or Gail could be the scholar or why, Dewey could be the fool, and not even think about these other characters. And it's like, maybe Mickey's the fool. I don't know.
Maybe Mickey's the fool. Well, Mickey's the psycho killer.
Yeah, I know.
Right? But I also think that Mickey, again, we talked about this at the beginning, that Mickey and Randy have like a lot in common.
They have an interesting thing, yeah.
That to me, Randy is the scholar in this film.
Yeah. Which is part of why I thought it should have been Mickey who killed him, even though Nancy says it was her, because I feel like we have Nancy and Gail as like shadow selves of each other.
Yeah.
Doing the reporter thing.
Yeah.
And like it was Gail's story that ruined her life, supposedly.
Supposedly.
And then we have, Randy and Mickey as shadow selves. So then like Mickey should be the one who kills Randy. And kind of like how Nancy goes after Gail and like stabs Dewey in front of her to be like, you took my son. I'll take your lover boy.
Yeah.
You know?
But Mickey does also give scholar vibes, like in the same way Randy does.
Yeah, he does.
But he is the psycho killer, so that's not how that works. Yeah, actually, now that you mention it, I could see an argument being made for Hallie being the fool. Again, like she knew that it was smarter to run.
And she like, she had everything working for her and she just ignored it.
Yeah.
She should have just bounced, honestly. I know she's friends with Sydney, but like, girl, you've known her for like a year and a half.
Yeah, exactly.
Get out. Anyway.
You don't know her much, really. And I like the idea of Dewey as the athlete, although he is also a bit foolish.
Yeah,
right?
and he also, that line he has about how like he purposefully is being a bumbling fool and looking inexperienced as a way of manipulating people would be very full.
Yeah.
Where it's like they seem like they're just the comic relief, but they have a lot more going on underneath.
Yeah.
But also he's just, I don't know. He's just Dewey.
He's Dewey.
So this has been Deep Thought Shallow Plots.
Follow us on Instagram at
Yes.
Deep Thought Shallow Plots. You'll see some incredibly important reference materials
For our last episode.
on They Live.
And who knows what you'll see for this episode. TBD. Thanks, as always, to Sound Guy Matt.
Always
Always looking out for us.
Yep.
He's our Dewey.
He's not that athletic. Join us next month. We'll be covering, I think we agreed, we think it's time for us to cover
Go back
a classic.
to a classic, so we will be covering
Nightmare on Elm Street.
on Elm Street, which also has a good sequel in my book.
Thanks again. Until next time. Bitch, hang up the phone and star 69 his ass.